My stepmother dragged me by my hair across the cold bathroom tiles, over a bottle of conditioner, while my father watched in silence. I sat in my room, icing my bruised cheek, thinking I had lost everything. Then the doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was the billionaire grandmother I was told had died 10 years ago, and she was holding the legal documents that would finally destroy them. My name is Harper Lane, and I am 27 years old. The morning that changed the entire trajectory of my life began with a decision that was pathetic in its simplicity. I just wanted my hair to smell like something other than the generic, chemically abrasive soap I bought in bulk at the discount store. It was a Tuesday in mid-November. The air in Maple Hollow was already biting, frost clinging to the manicured lawns of the suburban prison I called home. Inside the master bathroom on the second floor, the air was thick with steam. This was not my bathroom. My designated bathroom was the half-bath downstairs near the laundry room, the one with the leaky faucet and the cold draft that cut through the walls. But the shower downstairs was broken. A plumbing issue my father, Douglas, had promised to fix for 3 months and counting. So, under the heavy, unwritten laws of the Lane household, I was granted temporary, begrudging access to the master suite while my stepmother, Beverly, was out on her morning power walk. I stood under the spray, letting the hot water beat against my shoulders. My muscles were tight, knotted from hours sitting in a cubicle at Brightline Metrics, and the tension of walking on eggshells the moment I crossed the threshold of this house. I looked at the shelf built into the shower wall. It was a shrine to Beverly's vanity. There were rows of bottles, jars, and scrubs, all aligned with military precision. My eyes fixed on the tall, amber bottle in the center. It was a keratin-infused conditioner imported from Italy. Beverly had left the price tag on the bottom, perhaps to remind herself of her worth, or perhaps to remind me of mine. $85. It cost more than my entire weekly grocery budget. My hair felt like straw against my neck. The cheap shampoo I used stripped everything away, leaving it brittle. Just once. I told myself, just a coin-sized amount. She would never know. The bottle was opaque. The level was impossible to gauge with the naked eye. It was a small rebellion, a tiny theft of luxury in a life that felt increasingly devoid of comfort. I reached out. The plastic was smooth and warm from the steam. I popped the cap. The scent hit me instantly. Sandalwood, rich vanilla, and something floral and expensive. It smelled like wealth. It smelled like the life I was supposed to have before my mother died, before the debt, before Beverly. I squeezed a dollop into my palm. It was creamy, thick, and golden. I worked it into my scalp, closing my eyes, allowing myself 5 seconds of fantasy where I was not Harper the intruder, Harper the burden, but Harper the daughter of the house. The door did not open. It exploded inward. The sound was like a gunshot in the enclosed tiled space. The heavy oak door slammed against the stopper, and the rush of cold air from the bedroom mingled violently with the steam. My eyes flew open, stinging as soap and water ran down my forehead. Beverly stood there. She was not on her power walk. She was dressed in her sharp gray pantsuit, the one she wore when she wanted to intimidate a contractor or a store manager. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, hard as a helmet. Her eyes, usually cold and calculating, were wide with a sudden, manic fury. She looked at me. She looked at the amber bottle in my hand, the cap still open. She looked at the thick white foam cascading down my shoulders, the undeniable evidence of my crime. There was no preamble. There was no question of, "What are you doing?" or "Did you ask?" The reaction was immediate, primal, and terrifyingly disproportionate. "You little thief," she hissed, the words wet with venom. Before I could drop the bottle, before I could stammer an apology or turn off the water, she lunged into the shower stall. She did not care that she was getting her expensive suit wet. She did not care that I was naked and vulnerable. Her fingers, manicured into sharp red talons, locked into my wet hair. The pain was blinding. It radiated from my scalp down to my neck, a sharp, tearing sensation that made my vision white out for a second. I screamed, a raw sound that bounced off the marble walls. but she yanked hard, using my hair as a leash. "Get out!" she shrieked. "Get out of my things! Get out!" She dragged me. I scrambled to keep my footing on the slick porcelain, my feet slipping, my knees banging against the metal track of the shower door. I dropped the bottle. It clattered loudly against the tiles, spilling $85 of liquid gold down the drain. Beverly hauled me out onto the cold bathroom floor. The transition from the hot water to the freezing air was a physical shock. She didn't let go, with one hand still twisted in my hair, forcing my head back so I was looking up at the ceiling lights. She raised her other hand. The slap connected with a wet, meaty crack. It was not a warning tap. It was a full swing strike with the palm of her hand, landing square on my left cheekbone. My head snapped to the side. My ear rang with a high-pitched whine. The force of it threw me off balance completely, and I collapsed onto the bath mat, pulling her hand down with me until she finally released her grip. I gasped for air, curling into a ball, trying to cover myself with my arms. Water dripped from me, soaking the plush white rug that Beverly constantly reminded us cost $400. I was shaking, not just from the cold, but from the adrenaline dumping into my system. "You disgusting parasite!" Beverly stood over me, her chest heaving. Her suit was splattered with water, dark spots blooming on the gray fabric. "I work my fingers to the bone to keep this house decent, to have nice things. And you think you can just take? You think you can just slide your greasy hands over everything I own?" "I'm sorry," I choked out, my voice trembling. "I just used a little bit. I'm sorry." "It's not about the conditioner, you idiot." She kicked the discarded towel toward me, not to help, but out of disgust. "It is about respect. You possess none. You are exactly like your mother was, entitled, sloppy, grabbing at things that do not belong to you." The mention of my mother was a second slap, one that hurt deeper than the stinging on my cheek, but I could not speak. The shock had paralyzed my tongue. Then I saw movement in the doorway. My father, Douglas, was standing there. He was wearing his faded flannel robe, his glasses sliding down his nose. In his hand, he held his morning mug of black coffee. He looked at the scene before him. His wife, red-faced and violent, looming over his daughter, who was naked, wet, and cowering on the floor with a welting face. He blinked. He took a sip of his coffee. "Doug!" Beverly spun around, her voice instantly shifting pitch. The rage evaporated, replaced by a shrill, trembling note of victimhood. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "Look at this. I come home to get a file I forgot, and I find her in here, destroying the bathroom. She deliberately poured my imported conditioner down the drain. She was laughing, Doug. She was doing it to mock me." It was a lie so blatant, so absurd, that I almost laughed in hysteria. I looked up at my father, water dripping from my eyelashes. I waited for him to see me. I waited for the protective instinct that fathers are supposed to have to kick in. I waited for him to say, "Beverly, you hit her. We need to talk." Douglas shifted his weight. He looked at the steam still billowing from the shower. He looked at the spilled bottle. He looked everywhere except at my face. "Now, Bev," he mumbled, his voice weak, like dry leaves scraping together. "She probably didn't mean to spill it. Let's not get too worked up. It's just soap." "It is not just soap," Beverly shrieked, stamping her foot. "It is my sanctuary. She violates my space because she hates me. Doug, she wants to drive me out. It is me or her. I cannot live with a thief who disrespects me in my own home." Okay, my father soothed, stepping back into the hallway, creating distance. "Harper, you should know better than to touch Beverly's special things. You know how she gets." He looked at me then, for one fleeting second. In his eyes, I saw no anger. I saw something worse. I saw exhaustion. I saw a man who would trade his daughter's dignity for a quiet morning. He turned his back. "Clean this up, Harper," he said over his shoulder, his voice trailing off as he walked toward the stairs, "and apologize to Bev." The silence that followed his departure was suffocating. Beverly looked down at me, a smirk touching the corner of her mouth. The performance was over. She had won. She had tested the boundary, crossed into physical assault, and the judge had ruled in her favor. "You heard him," she whispered, leaning down so her face was inches from mine. The smell of her expensive perfume was cloying, mixing with the humid air. "Clean up my floor, and if you ever touch my things again, I will shave that head of yours bald while you sleep." She straightened up, smoothed her jacket, and walked out, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood of the hallway. I stayed on the floor for a long time. The cold from the tiles seeped into my bones, numbing the skin on my legs. My cheek throbbed in a steady, hot rhythm. Pulse, pulse, pulse. Slowly, mechanically, I reached for the towel she had kicked. I wrapped it around myself. I felt heavy, as if gravity had doubled in the last 5 minutes. I stood up, my knees shaking so hard I had to grip the countertop to stay upright. I looked in the mirror. The face staring back at me was a stranger's. My wet hair was plastered to my skull in tangled clumps. My eyes were red-rimmed and wide, but the most terrifying thing was the mark. On the left side of my face, spreading across my cheekbone and jaw, was a perfect, angry crimson imprint of a hand. I could see the distinct shape of 4 fingers. It was already beginning to swell, the skin tight and shiny. This was not discipline. This was not a family squabble. This was hatred. For years, I had endured the snide comments, the stolen letters, the financial squeezing, the isolation. I had told myself it was just a difficult personality clash. I had told myself that if I just worked harder, paid more rent, stayed quieter, it would smooth over. But looking at that handprint, I realized the truth. I was not safe here. The man downstairs drinking his coffee was not my protector. He was her accomplice. My phone was sitting on the edge of the sink where I had left it to play music. My hand trembled as I picked it up. I unlocked the screen. The time was 7:45 in the morning. I opened the camera app. My thumb hovered over the button. I had never documented anything before. It felt like a betrayal, like I was the one escalating the war, but the throb in my cheek was a reminder of reality. I turned my face to the light. I snapped the photo. In the high-resolution image, the damage looked even worse. The red was vivid against my pale skin. A single tear had escaped, tracking through the water droplets on my face. I stared at the picture. It was ugly. It was undeniable. It was evidence. I quickly dried off. Dressing in the cramped space with frantic movements, I put on my work blouse, but I couldn't bring myself to do my makeup. The foundation would sting the bruise, and part of me, a small, angry part, did not want to hide it. Let the world see. Let someone ask. I grabbed my cheap faux leather handbag, the strap peeling at the edges. I didn't clean the shower. I left the $85 bottle of conditioner lying on its side on the floor, a golden pool of liquid spreading toward the drain. Let her clean it. I opened the bathroom door and walked into the hallway. The house was quiet. I could hear the television on downstairs, the murmur of the morning news. I moved silently, a ghost in my own home, heading for the front door. As I reached for the handle, I felt eyes on me. I turned. Beverly was standing in the archway of the living room. She was holding a fresh cup of tea. In her other hand, she was gripping the spare bottle of that same conditioner, the one she kept in the hallway linen closet. She wasn't using it. She was holding it like a trophy, like a weapon. She didn't say a word. She just stared at me, her eyes flat and unblinking. Her gaze dropped to my bruised cheek, and then back to my eyes. There was no remorse. There was only a dare. "Do something," her eyes said. "No one will believe you." I pushed the door open and stepped out into the biting November wind. I walked to my 10-year-old sedan parked in the driveway, my hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before I could unlock the door. As I drove away, watching the house shrink in my rearview mirror, I told myself that this was just a bad morning. I told myself it was just one incident, a line crossed that we would all pretend never happened by dinner time. I had no idea that the photo sitting in my camera roll was the first domino. I had no idea that the sting on my cheek was the catalyst that would burn that entire house to the ground. All I knew was that I needed to get to work, and that my face hurt, and that for the first time in my life, I truly hated them both. Driving away from the house that morning, with the ghost of a handprint throbbing on my face, my mind did not stay in the present. It drifted back, pulling me into the deep, murky waters of the past. I needed to understand how I had arrived here. I needed to understand how the daughter of the house had become a trespasser in her own bathroom. It was not always a war zone. There was a time, before the scent of expensive Italian conditioner and the sharp click of designer heels on hardwood, when that house in Maple Hollow was just a home. It was a messy, loud, warm place. After my mother died of ovarian cancer during my sophomore year of high school, it was just my father and me. Douglas Lane was a man who knew everything about lumber and nothing about grief. He owned Lane Home Supply, a small hardware and construction material store on the edge of town. It was the kind of place that smelled of sawdust and fresh paint, where the locals came because Douglas would spend 20 minutes explaining the difference between drywall screws rather than rushing them to a checkout counter. But he was drowning, without my mother to handle the logistics of his life. He was a ship without a rudder. I tried to help, but I was 16 and navigating my own ocean of loss. We ate a lot of takeout. The laundry piled up. The bills for the store were paid late, accruing interest that ate away at our margins. That was the crack in the door. That was the weakness Beverly exploited. She appeared a year later. She was not from Maple Hollow. She was a transplant, a stylish widow from the city, who walked into Lane Home Supply looking for a specific shade of slate tile for a renovation project. She found my father behind the counter, buried under a mountain of invoices, looking defeated. Beverly did not offer sympathy. She offered efficiency. I remember the first time she came over for dinner. She did not bring a casserole like the church ladies. She brought a bottle of wine and a portfolio of suggestions for the store's inventory management. She told Douglas he was losing 15% on his overhead because of poor supplier contracts. She spoke a language of control that my father, in his chaos, found intoxicating. He didn't fall in love with her heart. He fell in love with her competence. I felt the shift in the air immediately. It was a static charge, a cold pressure that settled over the house. When they married 2 years later, just as I was starting college, the invasion began in earnest. It started with the furniture. My mother had loved floral patterns and soft, overstuffed armchairs. Our living room was a collection of mismatched comfort. One weekend, while I was away at my dormitory for freshman orientation, I came home to find the living room stripped bare. The soft floral couch was gone. The oak coffee table with the water rings from my childhood mugs was gone. In their place stood sleek, gray modern furniture, sharp angles, glass surfaces, cold leather that squeaked when you sat on it. When I asked where Mom's things were, Beverly didn't even look up from her magazine. She said they were too gloomy. She said they smelled like sickness and dust, and that Douglas needed a fresh start to attract a higher caliber of social circle. My father stood there, looking at his shoes, and mumbled that maybe she was right. Maybe it was time for a change. That was the first lesson. Memories were weakness. Efficiency was power. Over the next 4 years, while I studied data analytics, the house was systematically purged of my mother. Her paintings were replaced with abstract beige art. Her garden was paved over to make a patio for entertaining. Beverly called it elevating our lifestyle. I called it an erasure. But the most insidious change wasn't the furniture, it was the rules. Beverly was a master of the slow boundary shift. It started with small things. Harper, don't leave your shoes by the door. It looks cluttery. Harper, please use the downstairs fridge for your snacks. The upstairs one is for dinner ingredients. By the time I graduated, the house had been gerrymandered. There were Beverly's zones, and there were the common areas where I was tolerated as a guest. The master bathroom, with its soaking tub and heated floors, became her sanctuary. I was relegated to the downstairs half bath, the one where the water pressure was weak and the mirror was desilvering at the edges. And then there was the silence regarding my mother's side of the family. There was a name that floated in the periphery of my childhood, like a ghost story. Evelyn, my mother's mother. I had no memories of her. My mother rarely spoke of her. And when she did, it was with a complicated expression of longing and fear. After Mom died, I asked Douglas about her. I asked if we should tell my grandmother. My father's face had hardened, a rare expression for him. He told me that Evelyn was not a stable woman. He called her a crazy old lady who had made my mother's life miserable. He said she was toxic, judgmental, and cruel. When Beverly arrived, she amplified this narrative. She would make offhand comments about how we had to protect the family reputation from that side of the gene pool. She painted Evelyn as a deranged recluse who would only bring drama and pain. But I remembered the letters. During my junior year of college, I came home for winter break and found a stack of mail on the counter. There was a thick, cream-colored envelope addressed to me. The handwriting was elegant, shaky, but looped with an old-fashioned calligraphy pen. The return address was a P.O. box in the city, with no name, just initials, E.H. I had reached for it, my heart hammering, sensing instinctively who it was from. Beverly's hand had snatched it away before my fingers could graze the paper. I remember the speed of her movement, like a viper striking. She smiled, a tight, plastic expression that didn't reach her eyes. She told me it was just junk mail, or maybe a scam. She said she would handle it for my father so he wouldn't be upset. I asked her to give it back. I told her it was addressed to me. She looked at me with a pitying expression, the kind you give to a slow child. She said I was too naive, that I didn't understand how people preyed on families like ours. She walked to the shredder in the home office, the office that used to be my playroom, and fed the envelope into the machine. I heard the paper tearing. I heard the secrets inside being sliced into confetti. Later, when I confronted my father, he wouldn't meet my eyes. He just repeated the script. She is not someone you want to get involved with. Harper, Beverly is just protecting you. I stopped asking, but I never stopped wondering. Meanwhile, the tentacles of Beverly's control extended into the lifeblood of our family, the store. Lane Home Supply had always been my father's kingdom, but slowly, he became a figurehead. Beverly took over the back office. She fired Mrs. Gable, the bookkeeper who had been with us for 20 years, claiming she was digitally illiterate. Beverly installed new software, new accounting practices, and new banking authorizations. I would see them at the kitchen table late at night. Beverly would have stacks of documents with sign here sticky notes attached to them. She would be talking fast, using words like tax optimization, liability shielding, and asset restructuring. My father, tired from hauling lumber and dealing with contractors, would just rub his temples and sign. He trusted her. He believed she was the reason the store was finally turning a profit. He didn't see that the profit wasn't going back into the business. It was going into renovations, into leasing a luxury car, into the Italian leather handbags that started appearing in her closet. He was signing away his autonomy, one signature at a time. And then came the trap that caught me. I graduated with a degree in data analytics and landed a junior position at Brightline Metrics. It was a good job, respectable, with a path for growth. But the salary for an entry-level analyst was barely enough to cover the cost of living in the city, and I had a mountain of student loans. I had $45,000 in debt. The interest rates were predatory. I made a calculation. If I lived at home for 2 years, commuting an hour each way, I could throw 70% of my income at the loans. I could be debt-free by 25. I presented this plan to my father, showing him the spreadsheet. He nodded, smiling, happy to have his daughter home. Beverly was not happy. 2 days after I moved back in, she presented me with a contract. It wasn't a family agreement. It was a lease. She demanded $1,200 a month in living fees. I stared at the paper. $1,200 was nearly market rate for a studio apartment in the bad part of town. When I argued, telling Douglas that this defeated the purpose of me staying home to save, Beverly cut in. She gave a speech about responsibility. She said she wouldn't enable a freeloader. She said that as an adult, I needed to learn the value of $1. She claimed the money would go into a household fund to cover the extra utilities and food I would consume. My father, caught in the middle, offered a weak compromise. He looked at me with pleading eyes, begging me silently not to cause a scene. I signed. I had no security deposit for an apartment, no credit history yet. I was stuck. So, for the last 3 years, I had been paying $1,200 a month to live in my childhood home while being treated like an unwanted squatter. I paid for my own groceries because Beverly complained that I ate too much of her organic produce. I did my own laundry at the laundromat on weekends because she said my clothes would clog her high-efficiency machine. I stayed in my room, the only space that was still vaguely mine, though she had stripped the wallpaper and painted it a sterile linen white. I watched as she bought new cars. I watched as she retiled the kitchen. I watched as she wore cashmere sweaters, and I watched my father shrink. He became smaller, quieter, a ghost in his own life. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped defending me. He became a vessel for her will. I told myself I could endure it. I told myself it was just a transaction. 2 more years. I would whisper to myself in the dark, $10,000 left on the loan. Just hold on. But resentment is not a math problem. You cannot subtract it away. It accumulates like sediment in a pipe, layer by layer, until there is no room for anything else to flow. Every snide comment about my cheap clothes, every time she threw away my shampoo because the bottle clashed with the bathroom aesthetic, every time she rolled her eyes when I entered a room, it was all building towards something. When I stood in that bathroom this morning, holding that stolen bottle of conditioner, I wasn't just trying to wash my hair. I was trying to reclaim a tiny fraction of the luxury that my rent money was paying for. I was trying to feel, for just 5 minutes, that I was not a second-class citizen in the house my mother and father had bought together. The slap didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't an accident of temper. As I drove toward the Brightline Metrics office, the cold air from the car vents stinging my swollen face, the realization hit me harder than her hand had. This was not a family. This was a regime, and I was not a daughter waiting to be loved. I was an enemy combatant who had been foolish enough to think there were rules of engagement. The boundaries had been erased long ago. She had taken my mother's furniture. She had taken my grandmother's letters. She had taken my father's spine. She had taken my money, and now she had taken the safety of my own body. I touched the hot skin of my cheek. The sadness of the memories began to recede, replaced by something colder, sharper, and infinitely more useful. I dried my eyes. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The girl who had begged for her father's attention was gone, left back on that bathroom floor. The woman driving the car was someone else entirely. I was a data analyst. My entire job was to look at chaotic information, find the patterns, and identify the anomalies. I had spent years looking at spreadsheets for work, ignoring the data set that was living right under my nose. But now I was paying attention, and I knew, with a sudden crystal clarity, that if I dug deep enough into the life Beverly had constructed over the ruins of my family, I would find more than just a mean stepmother. I would find the flaw in the system. And when I found it, I wasn't going to fix it. I was going to exploit it. The fallout from the conditioner incident was swift, surgical, and completely fabricated. By the time I arrived at Brightline Metrics that morning, my phone was already lighting up with notifications. Beverly had not wasted a single second. I sat in my car in the parking garage, applying a 3rd layer of industrial-strength concealer to my left cheek. The bruise was darkening, turning a sickly shade of purple-yellow that looked violent under the harsh fluorescent cabin lights. My phone buzzed against the center console. It was a text from my Aunt Sarah, my father's sister, who lived 2 states over. "Harper, honey, Beverly told us about your episode this morning. Please tell me you are taking your medication. We are all so worried about your temper." I stared at the screen, my hand freezing mid-motion. My medication? I was not on any medication. I never had been. But that was the narrative Beverly had been weaving for years. A slow-drip poison fed to the extended family. In her version of reality, I was not the daughter working a full-time job and paying exorbitant rent. I was the unstable, emotional burden who was prone to episodes. She had inverted the truth so completely that if I tried to defend myself now, if I replied saying, "She hit me," it would only look like the paranoid ravings she had warned them about. I was trapped in a cage of her design, built from lies I hadn't even known were being told. I turned off my phone. I couldn't look at it. I walked into the office, keeping my head down, my hair pulled forward to curtain the left side of my face. My colleagues at Brightline were nice people, mostly focused on their own screens and deadlines. But the concealer wasn't magic. When I went to the break room for coffee, Liam from the marketing department frowned at me. "Hey, Harper," he said, pausing with his mug halfway to his mouth. "You look rough. Everything okay?" "Just tired," I said, forcing a smile that made my cheek throb. "Rough morning commute." He didn't push. People rarely do. They sense the darkness at the edge of a person's life, and they instinctively step back, afraid that if they ask the real question, they might be obligated to help with the answer. At lunch, I sat in the corner booth of the sandwich shop downstairs with Mila. Mila was the only person who knew the shape of my life, though even she didn't know the full extent of it. She was sharp, cynical, and fiercely loyal. I moved my hair behind my ear. Mila gasped. She dropped her sandwich onto her wrapper. "Harper," she whispered, leaning across the table. "Did you get mugged?" "In a way," I said. I told her about the shower. I told her about the $85 conditioner. I told her about the hand that had cracked across my face while my father drank his coffee. Mila didn't eat for the rest of the hour. She sat there, her dark eyes narrowed, watching me with an intensity that made me squirm. "You know this isn't normal, right?" she said, her voice low and hard. "I know you joke about it. I know you say you have a live-in drill sergeant. But Harper, this is assault. You are living with a violent person." "It was just one slap," I said, the automatic defense springing to my lips. "She lost her temper. I provoked her." "Stop," Mila cut me off. "Listen to yourself. You are rationalizing. You are a data analyst. If you saw a data set with this many red flags, would you invest in the company? No. You would short the stock and run." She reached into her bag and pulled out a notepad. She ripped off a page and pushed it toward me. "Document it," she commanded. "Start a log, date, time, incident, take photos, record conversations if you can do it safely, because right now, she is gaslighting you into thinking you are the problem. You need data to remind yourself that you are not crazy." I looked at the blank paper. It felt dangerous. Writing it down made it real. But as I touched the tender skin of my cheek, I knew she was right. "Okay," I said. "I will." When I returned home that evening, the atmosphere in the house had shifted from volatile to totalitarian. The first thing I noticed was the lock. Beverly had installed a keyed padlock on the linen closet in the hallway. It was a shiny brass mechanism that looked ridiculous against the domestic white wood, but the message was clear. Inside the bathroom, the downstairs one I was allowed to use, there were sticky notes. They were everywhere. Neon pink squares attached to the mirror, the cabinet doors, even the toilet tank. "Do not use Beverly's towels. Clean sink immediately after use. Limit showers to 10 minutes. Water costs money." It was humiliating. I was 27 years old, a professional woman contributing significantly to the household expenses, and I was being treated like a delinquent toddler. But the pièce de résistance was in the hallway. High up on the wall, near the ceiling, a small black dome had been mounted. A red light blinked rhythmically in the center. My father was sitting in his usual armchair in the living room, a can of cheap domestic beer in his hand, the television blaring a game show. He didn't look up when I walked in. "Dad?" I asked, pointing to the dome. Is that a camera?" Douglas sighed, a long, deflating sound. He kept his eyes on the screen. "It's a dummy. Harper, it's fake. Beverly feels unsafe. After your outburst this morning, she thinks we need security." "My outburst?" I repeated, my voice rising. Dad, she hit me. Look at my face. He took a long swallow of beer. She says she was defending herself because you were thrashing around. Look, honey, just keep your head down, okay? Don't antagonize her. I just want some peace. I looked at him. He was gray, fading into the upholstery. He wasn't keeping the peace. He was surrendering territory. He was letting an enemy army occupy his home because fighting back required energy he no longer possessed. The fake camera blinked at me. Even though I knew it was plastic and batteries, I felt watched. I felt the walls closing in. The escalation didn't stop at sticky notes. 2 days later, Beverly cornered me in the kitchen while I was making coffee. She was wearing a silk robe, looking rested and smug. We need to talk about your contribution, she said, leaning against the counter. I pay $1,200 a month, I said, gripping my mug. That is more than fair for a room with no lock. Inflation, she said, examining her fingernails. And the emotional toll you take on this family. I am raising your rent to $1,500, effective immediately, and I want it in cash. The bank transfers are too messy for your father's books. I can't afford $1,500, I said, panic flaring in my chest. That would leave me with almost nothing after my loan payments. And why cash? That doesn't make sense for the books. If you don't like it, she smiled, and it was a shark's smile. You can leave. I am sure you can find a cardboard box under the bridge that fits your budget. But as long as you are under my roof, you pay the tax. I looked at my father. He was standing by the fridge, pretending to look for creamer. He said nothing. I agreed. I had no choice. I didn't have first and last month's rent for an apartment saved up yet. I was trapped by the very poverty she was enforcing. But the cash demand triggered something in my analyst brain. Messy for the books. Why would a bank transfer be messy? Unless the books were already a mess. That night, I waited until the house was silent. I knew my father kept his laptop in his briefcase by the door. I crept downstairs, avoiding the squeaky floorboards I had memorized as a child. The fake camera blinked its red eye, irrelevant and impotent. I opened the laptop. I knew his password. It was still my mother's birthday. He hadn't changed it in 12 years. I logged into the cloud accounting software for Lane Home Supply. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wasn't an accountant, but I knew data. I pulled the transaction history for the last 6 months. It was subtle, but it was there. There were recurring payments to an entity called BV Consulting. $2,000 here, $3,000 there. They were coded as marketing or administrative services. Beverly did not do consulting. Beverly did not do marketing. Beverly spent her days at the country club or reorganizing the house. I scrolled back further. The payments started small 3 years ago. Right around the time she told my father they needed to optimize his tax situation. Over the last year, they had accelerated. I did a quick sum in my head. Tens of thousands of dollars, siphoned out of a struggling hardware store and into, where? I didn't have the destination account details. I didn't have proof that BV Consulting was Beverly. It was circumstantial. If I showed this to Douglas now, Beverly would just say it was legitimate work she did for the business. She would spin it. She would say I was hacking, spying, trying to destroy the business. I needed more. I closed the laptop, wiped the keys with my sleeve, and went back upstairs. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, doing the math of my father's ruin. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, a week later. I came home from work to find chaos in the living room. An antique vase, a blue porcelain thing that Beverly claimed was from the Ming Dynasty, but I suspected was from a high-end mall kiosk, lay shattered on the hardwood floor. Beverly was waiting for me. Douglas was there too, looking pale. "She's here," Beverly announced as I walked in the door. "The vandal returns." "What happened?" I asked, eyeing the shards. "Don't play dumb," Beverly snapped. "I came home and found this. You were the last one to leave this morning. You knocked it over, probably in one of your clumsy rushes." "I didn't touch it," I said, my voice steady. "It was fine when I left. I didn't even go into the living room today." Liar, Beverly shrieked. She pointed at the floor. That vase was worth $4,000, and you are going to pay for it, Douglas. Deduct it from her salary, or better yet, take her whole paycheck this month. Dad, I looked at him. I didn't do this. This is insane. I am not paying for her vase. Douglas rubbed his face. Harper, if you broke it, just admit it. It's a valuable piece. I didn't break it, I yelled, the frustration finally boiling over. Don't you raise your voice at him. Beverly lunged forward. This time, I was ready. My hand was in my pocket. My thumb pressed the side button of my phone 3 times, a shortcut I had set up after my lunch with Mila. The voice recorder app started running silently in the background. I am docking your pay, Beverly declared, her face inches from mine. You are going to pay for every shard. You are useless, clumsy, and destructive, just like your mother was. My mother was not destructive, I said, trying to keep my voice level for the recording. And you are stealing from me. Stealing? Beverly laughed, a high, brittle sound. I am charging you for the air you breathe, which is more than you are worth. When your father retires next year, things are going to change, little girl. This house is mine. The deed will be in my name for estate planning. And the day he retires, you are out on the street. I will change the locks before his retirement party is over. I saw Douglas flinch. He looked up, startled. Bev, we said we'd help her until she's 30. Plans change, Beverly hissed at him, not even looking away from me. I am done carrying dead weight. I backed away. I had it. I had the threat. I had the admission of the house transfer. I had the financial extortion. I turned and walked out the front door, needing air. The sun was setting, casting long, blood-red shadows across the lawn. I saw Mrs. Cole, our next-door neighbor, checking her mail. She was a sweet woman who used to bake cookies for me when I was a child. She had seen me grow up. As I stood on the porch, Beverly followed me out, grabbing my arm to spin me around. I am not done talking to you, she screamed, shoving me backward. I stumbled, catching myself on the porch railing. I looked at Mrs. Cole. Our eyes met. She saw Beverly shove me. She saw the aggression. She saw the fear on my face. Mrs. Cole hesitated. Her hand hovered over her mailbox. Then, slowly, she turned her back. She walked quickly up her driveway and into her house, closing the door firmly. The click of her deadbolt echoed across the quiet street. I stood there, the wind biting through my thin work blouse. Beverly had gone back inside, satisfied with her dominance. My father was inside, drinking his beer. The neighbors were inside, pretending they saw nothing. I was completely, utterly alone. There was no cavalry coming. There was no misunderstood father waiting to wake up. There was no community support. I walked to my car and opened the trunk. Inside was my gym bag. I dug through it until my fingers closed around the plastic bottle I had bought at the drugstore on my lunch break. It was a $3 bottle of conditioner. The cheap stuff. The kind that smelled like synthetic coconut. I looked at the house. It looked warm from the outside. The windows glowing with golden light. It looked like a home. But it was a stage set. A facade built to hide a rot so deep it was eating the foundation. A thought bloomed in my mind, cold and clear as ice. If the house is a lie, if the marriage is a lie, if the family is a lie, then what else is a lie? Beverly had told me for years that my mother's family wanted nothing to do with me. She told me I was unlovable to them. She told me they were the villains. But Beverly was a liar. I gripped the cheap bottle of conditioner until the plastic crinkled under my fingers. This is the last time, I whispered to the empty driveway. This is the last time you decide what I am worth. I wasn't just going to survive them anymore. I was going to investigate them. And if I found one single loose thread in the tapestry of lies they had wrapped around me, I was going to pull it until the whole thing unraveled. It was 11:45 at night when I finally pulled into the driveway. The rain was coming down in sheets, hammering against the roof of my car, blurring the world into streaks of gray and black. My body felt like it was made of lead. I had pulled a 14-hour shift at Brightline Metrics, covering for a team lead who had called in sick, staring at lines of code until my eyes burned and my temples throbbed with a dull, rhythmic pressure. All I wanted was hot water. I didn't want food. I didn't want conversation. I just wanted to stand under the spray until my muscles unknotted and the chill of the office air conditioning left my bones. I unlocked the front door quietly, a skill I had perfected over the last 3 years. The house was dark, save for the blue flickering light of the television in the living room. Beverly was lying on the pristine white sofa, wrapped in a cashmere throw, her breathing even and deep. My father was nowhere to be seen, likely already asleep upstairs. I crept past the living room, holding my breath. Seeing her asleep felt like walking past a dormant landmine. I made it to the stairs and climbed them, skipping the third step that always groaned under pressure. I went straight to the bathroom, the main one. At this hour, with the rain pounding against the roof, I gambled that the noise of the shower wouldn't wake anyone. I needed the pressure of the good showerhead, not the trickle from the downstairs faucet. I locked the door. I stripped off my damp work clothes, leaving them in a pile. I stepped into the shower stall and turned the handle. The water sputtered and then flowed, hot and merciful. I leaned my head back, closing my eyes, and then I opened them, and I saw it. Sitting on the edge of the tub, not in its usual spot in the locked cabinet, was the amber bottle, the Italian conditioner. It was sitting there like a trap, like a dare. Beverly never left things out. She was pathologically tidy. If it was there, she had placed it there. She knew I was coming home late. She knew I would be exhausted. She was testing me. I looked at the bottle. I looked at my dry, brittle hair in the reflection of the faucet handle. A sudden, hot spike of rebellion shot through my exhaustion. Why not? I thought, I pay $1,500 a month to live in this prison. I bought the groceries she ate for lunch. I paid the electric bill last month when she forgot. Why shouldn't I use a teaspoon of conditioner? It was a stupid, tired thought. It was the logic of someone pushed too far. I reached out. My hand was shaking from fatigue. I grabbed the bottle. I flipped the cap. I squeezed a dollop into my hand, the scent of sandalwood and vanilla instantly filling the steam. I was massaging it into my scalp, eyes closed. When the door didn't just open, it flew off its latch. I hadn't locked it well enough, or maybe she had a key. It didn't matter. I knew it. The shriek cut through the sound of the water like a knife. Beverly was there. She hadn't been asleep. She had been waiting. She was fully dressed in her silk robe, her eyes wide and manic. "You thief! You dirty little thief!" She didn't stop at the threshold this time. She charged into the bathroom. The steam swirled around her like a storm. I scrambled back, blindingly vulnerable, soap in my eyes. "Beverly, stop!" She didn't stop. She lunged at me, her hands reaching not for my hair this time, but for my shoulders. She shoved me. It was a violent, two-handed push, fueled by a rage that had absolutely nothing to do with hair products and everything to do with hatred. My feet slipped on the wet tile. I went backward. My right side collided hard with the glass shelving unit mounted on the wall. Crash. The sound was sickening. The tempered glass shelf shattered under my weight. Shards of glass and metal brackets rained down into the tub. I felt a sharp, searing line of fire slice across my upper arm, just below the shoulder. I cried out, clutching my arm. I looked down. Blood was already welling up, bright red, mixing with the shower water and swirling down the drain in a pink torrent. "Look what you did!" Beverly screamed, stepping back to avoid the glass. "You broke my shelf, you clumsy, destructive animal!" She wasn't looking at my arm. She wasn't looking at the blood. She was looking at the chrome bracket hanging off the wall. I gasped for air, shock freezing my lungs. My phone. I had placed my phone on the dry vanity counter before I got in. I had set it to record. I had done it automatically, a reflex born from Mila's advice, just in case Douglas woke up and started an argument about the rent. It was sitting there, 5 feet away. The little red waveform on the screen was bouncing. It was catching every word. "You pushed me," I wheezed. holding my bleeding arm. "Beverly, you pushed me into the glass." "I did not," she screeched. "You slipped. You were drunk. I smelled it on you." I hadn't had a drop of alcohol in months. She was rewriting the script in real time. Then, heavy footsteps pounded down the hallway. "What is going on? What happened?" Douglas appeared in the doorway. He was wearing his pajamas, his hair mussed from sleep, his face confused. Beverly spun around instantly. The transformation was terrifying. Her shoulders dropped. Her voice went from a shriek to a sob. She cradled her own hand, which was perfectly fine. "Oh, Doug! Thank God!" She ran to him, burying her face in his chest. "She attacked me. I heard a noise and came in to check. I thought she had fallen, and she just lunged at me. She shoved me against the door. She's crazy. Doug!" She broke the shelf in a rage. I stood there, naked, shivering, bleeding. The cut on my arm was deep. I could feel the pulse of it. The water was turning cold. "Dad," I said. My voice was small. "Dad, look at me." Douglas looked over Beverly's shoulder. He looked at the shattered glass in the tub. He looked at the blood running down my white skin. He looked at the bruise on my cheek from weeks ago that was still fading, and the fresh blood on my arm now. He saw the violence. It was written in red ink all over the bathroom. He looked at me for 3 seconds. Then, he looked down at Beverly, who was weeping fake tears into his shirt. "Are you okay, Bev?" he asked softly. "Did she hurt you?" The world stopped. The sound of the rain, the water, the blood in my ears. It all went silent. He didn't ask if I needed a doctor. He didn't ask why I was bleeding. He asked the aggressor if she was hurt. Something inside me broke. It wasn't a bone. It wasn't a shelf. It was the last, thin tether of hope I had been holding on to. The hope that my father was just weak, not complicit. That hope snapped with a sound louder than the glass. I'm shaken," Beverly sobbed, peeking out to gauge his reaction. "I don't feel safe. Doug, look at her eyes. She's unhinged." I turned off the water. The silence in the room was sudden and heavy. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain that she had been waiting for me, or that she had shoved me. I stepped out of the tub, ignoring the glass shards that bit into the soles of my feet. I grabbed a towel and wrapped it around myself. I grabbed a smaller hand towel and pressed it hard against the cut on my arm. The white terry cloth turned red instantly. I walked past them. "Harper," Douglas said, his voice taking on that familiar, exhausted tone of reprimand. "Don't you walk away while—" I didn't stop. I walked into my bedroom. I locked the door. I didn't cry. The time for crying was over. I felt cold. A deep, glacial cold that started in my chest and spread to my fingertips. I dressed quickly. Jeans, a sweater, sneakers. I packed a backpack, laptop, charger, wallet, passport, the folder of documents I had stolen from the office. I wrapped my arm in gauze from my personal first aid kit and taped it tight. It throbbed, a steady drumbeat of pain. But I welcomed it. It was clarity. I heard them in the hallway. They were outside my door. They thought I couldn't hear them over the rain. Or maybe they just didn't care. I moved to the door and pressed my ear against the wood. I held my phone up, the recording app still running. "She has to go." "Doug," Beverly's voice was a low hiss. "This is the final straw. She is dangerous." I know, Douglas muttered. "But where will she go? She's broke." "Who cares?" Beverly snapped. "Listen to me. We need to call a lawyer tomorrow. We need to document this as a domestic disturbance caused by her. We need a paper trail." "Why?" Douglas asked. "Because," Beverly lowered her voice further, but the microphone caught it. "Because when you retire, and we transfer the deed to the trust like we planned, we don't want her having any claim. If she is documented as mentally unstable and violent, she can't contest the will. The house becomes mine. Ours. Only ours." I guess," Douglas said. "If you think that's necessary." "It is necessary," she said. "It is the only way to protect our assets." I stared at the phone screen. The waveform spiked with every word. Protect our assets. Mentally unstable. House becomes mine. She wasn't just mean. She was plotting a coup, and my father was signing the permission slip. I stopped the recording. I saved the file. I named it Evidence Assault Confession Nov 19. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. My hands were shaking, but my typing was precise. I uploaded the file to my Google Drive. I emailed it to my work address. I emailed it to a dummy account I had created years ago. I copied it to a USB drive attached to my keychain. I was a data analyst. You never, ever keep your only copy of the dataset on a local drive. I looked around the room. This had been my room since I was 5 years old. I looked at the spot where my mother used to sit and read to me. I felt nothing. The ghosts were gone. There was only drywall and paint. I texted Mila. I need a place to sleep. I'm hurt. I have a recording. Leaving now. Her reply came 10 seconds later. Key is under the mat. Come now. I'll have the first aid kit ready. I threw the backpack over my good shoulder. I opened the bedroom door. Beverly and Douglas were still in the hallway, whispering. They jumped when I appeared. Beverly's eyes narrowed. She looked at the bag. Where do you think you are going? I didn't answer. I walked past them toward the stairs. Harper, Douglas called out. Harper, stop. We need to discuss how you are going to pay for that shelf. I kept walking. I reached the bottom of the stairs. Don't you dare walk out that door, Beverly yelled from the top of the landing. She leaned over the railing. Her face twisted. If you leave now, don't you think about coming back? I will change the locks. You will be on the street. I put my hand on the doorknob. And you better apologize, she screamed, her voice cracking. You apologize to me for ruining my night. I paused. For 1 second, I considered turning around. I considered playing the recording for them right there. I considered screaming that I knew about the theft, the lies, the trust fund they stole. But I didn't. That was what the old Harper would have done. The old Harper wanted to be understood. The new Harper just wanted to win, and you don't show your hand to the enemy until the trap is already sprung. I opened the door and stepped out into the rain. I didn't slam it. I pulled it shut with a quiet, decisive click. I walked to my car. I didn't look back at the window. I didn't look back at the fake camera. I got in, started the engine, and backed out of the driveway. 20 minutes later, I was in Mila's apartment in downtown Brookhaven City. It was a tiny one-bedroom place that smelled of cat litter and expensive coffee. Mila didn't say a word when she saw me. She just pulled me into the bathroom, sat me on the toilet lid, and unwrapped the bloody gauze on my arm. She cleaned the cut with peroxide. It stung so badly that tears finally leaked out of my eyes, hot and salty. She applied butterfly bandages and wrapped it properly. She pushed you into glass? Mila said flatly. Taping the bandage, it wasn't a question. Yes, I said. And your dad? He asked if she was okay. Mila stopped. She looked at me, her eyes fierce. Okay, that's it. We are done playing defense. She made me tea. I sat on her lumpy sofa, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like her, listening to the rain hit the window. I took out my phone. I plugged in my headphones. I pressed play. Beverly's voice filled my ears. She is dangerous. The house becomes mine. Protect our assets. I listened to it again and again. A strange sound bubbled up in my throat. It started as a sob, a ragged intake of breath, but then it twisted. It turned into a laugh, a dark, dry, humorless laugh that shook my shoulders. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't unstable, I wasn't sensitive. I was right. I had been right for 10 years. I looked at the waveform on the screen. It was ugly. It was the sound of betrayal. But to me, it was beautiful. It was a weapon. I opened my laptop again. I created a new folder. I named it Project Reclaim. I dragged the audio file into it. Then I dragged the photos of my face. Then I dragged the PDF of the bank statements I had stolen. I sat back, the pain in my arm throbbing in time with my heartbeat. I was homeless. I was bleeding. I was broke. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't helpless. I had the data, and I was going to use it to burn their world down. The morning sun was hitting the pavement of Mila's street with a cheerful, oblivious brightness that felt insulting. I sat on the edge of her lumpy sofa, my left arm throbbing under the tight bandage, a cup of lukewarm coffee in my good hand. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. According to the schedule that had ruled my life for the last 5 years, Beverly would be at her Power Pilates class until 11, followed by her bi-weekly appointment at the salon. My father would be at the store, likely hiding in the back office pretending to look at invoices while actually staring at the wall. The house in Maple Hollow was empty. "You don't have to go back there," Mila said, watching me lace up my sneakers with difficulty. "I can go, or we can call the police escort." "No, I said, my voice sounding surprisingly steady to my own ears. "If I call the police now, they get warned. They have time to hide things. I need my birth certificate, my social security card, and my passport. If I leave those behind, Beverly will hold them hostage for years." I drove back to the suburbs in a daze. The pain in my arm was a sharp, grounding anchor. It reminded me that I wasn't going there to negotiate. I was going there to extract. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked perfectly normal. The grass was manicured. The curtains were drawn. It looked like the kind of American dream house you see in insurance commercials. I felt bile rise in my throat. I keyed in the code on the garage keypad. It still worked. They hadn't changed it yet. Arrogance, or maybe just laziness. The silence inside was heavy. It smelled of lemon polish and lies. I moved quickly, bypassing the kitchen, bypassing the living room where the ghost of the broken vase incident still lingered. I went straight upstairs. I grabbed my documents from the desk in my room, but as I turned to leave, a thought snagged in my brain like a hook. The closet. Not the linen closet Beverly locked, not the master walk-in, the storage closet in the guest room, the room that used to be my mother's sewing room. Beverly hated that room. She called it musty and depressing, and rarely set foot inside, using it only to dump boxes she didn't want to deal with. If there was anything left of my history, it would be in the one place Beverly felt too superior to touch. I walked into the room. It was stiflingly hot, the air stagnant. Stacks of cardboard boxes lined the wall, mostly filled with old holiday decorations and my father's tax records from the 90s. But in the corner, shoved behind a broken vacuum cleaner, was a smaller, dust-covered box. It was labeled in my father's handwriting, "Laura's Things, Misk." My heart hammered against my ribs. I knelt down, ignoring the shooting pain in my shoulder. I pulled the flaps open. It smelled like lavender, real, dried lavender, the scent of my mother. Inside were old photo albums, a few scarves, and a jewelry box that had been emptied long ago. But at the bottom, beneath a layer of old greeting cards, was a thick bundle of envelopes tied together with rough twine. I lifted the bundle. It was heavy. The envelopes were high quality, thick, cream-colored linen paper. I squinted at the handwriting on the front. It was shaky, the loops of the letters trembling but elegant, written in fountain pen ink that had faded to a soft charcoal. To Harper Lane. I flipped the first envelope over. My breath hitched. On the back, scrawled in thick, aggressive black permanent marker, were notes. Intercepted June 2018. Trash. Do not show Doug. I flipped to the next one. Processed August 2019. Solicitation. Ignored. And another. January 2021. She is asking again. Blocked. It was Beverly's handwriting. The sharp, angular slash of her pen was unmistakable. I sat back on the dusty floor. My legs numb. These weren't lost letters. These were stolen letters. For years. While I was living in this house, paying rent, being told I was unloved and unwanted by my extended family. These letters had been sitting in a box 10 feet away from my bedroom. I pulled the twine. It snapped with a dry pop. My hands were shaking so badly I almost tore the first envelope. The postmark was from 5 years ago. I unfolded the letter. My dearest Harper. I am writing this, though I do not know if it will reach you. Your father has made it very clear that he does not want me in your life. When I called last week, that woman, Beverly, told me that you wanted nothing to do with me. She said you blamed me for your mother's suffering and that I was a toxic influence. If that is truly how you feel, I will respect your space, but I need you to know that I loved your mother more than life itself, and I have loved you from afar every single day. I am not the monster they paint me to be. I am just an old woman with too much money and not enough family. Please, if you ever change your mind, just call. Love. Grandma Evelyn. Tears blurred my vision. Hot and stinging. That woman told me you wanted nothing to do with me. It was a mirror game. Beverly had told Evelyn I hated her. She had told me Evelyn hated me. She had stood in the middle, intercepting the love from both sides, and built a wall of silence so she could control the kingdom. I opened the next one. It was dated 2 years ago. Harper. I am getting older, and my lawyers are pressing me to finalize my estate. I have set up a trust fund in your name, separate from the main estate. It matures on your 28th birthday. It is substantial. Harper. It includes a controlling block of preferred stock in Hawthorne Capital Group. However, the terms require a beneficiary verification. I need to see you. I need to know you are safe. I have heard rumors, terrible rumors, that things are not well in that house. I sent a private investigator to the store, but Douglas threw him out. Why won't you answer me? Evelyn. I froze. The words swam on the page. Hawthorne Capital Group. The name sounded vaguely familiar, like something I had scrolled past on a Bloomberg terminal at work or seen on the spine of a Forbes magazine in a waiting room. I pulled my laptop out of my backpack right there on the floor. I tethered it to my phone's hotspot, my fingers flying across the keys. I typed, Hawthorne Capital Group, Evelyn Hawthorne. The search results loaded in 0.4 seconds. The first image was a black and white photo of the woman I had just pictured as a lonely grandmother. She was wearing a sharp blazer, standing in front of a skyscraper in Manhattan. The headline read, The Iron Widow, How Evelyn Hawthorne Built a Real Estate Empire from the Ashes of the 1990 Crash. I clicked the next link, Net Worth Analysis, The Quiet Billions of the Hawthorne Family. I clicked another, Evelyn Hawthorne, chairwoman of HCG, remains one of the most elusive figures in New York finance. I sat there, the laptop screen glowing in the dim light of the storage room. Billionaire. Not millionaire. Not comfortable. Billionaire. The air left my lungs. I looked at the letters again. Trust fund. Controlling block of stock. My God. It wasn't just about control. It wasn't just about Beverly wanting to be the queen bee of a suburban household. It was about millions of dollars. If I connected with Evelyn, I would have resources. I would have lawyers. I would have power. And Beverly with her leased car and her $4,000 vase and her petty theft from my father's hardware store, would be nothing. They hadn't just stolen my grandmother. They had stolen my future. They had kept me poor, kept me in debt, kept me paying $1,500 a month in rent. While I was sitting on a winning lottery ticket, they refused to let me cash. I felt a wave of nausea, followed immediately by a cold, clarifying rage. I dug deeper into the box. At the very bottom, underneath a stack of old birthday cards, was a single sheet of paper. It was a photocopy. It looked like a draft of a legal document. Last Will and Testament of Laura Lane. I scanned the legal jargon. My mother didn't have much when she died. No money, just love. But there was a clause. Any future inheritance or distribution from the Hawthorne estate intended for my daughter, Harper Lane, shall be administered solely by the Hawthorne family office, provided that Harper maintains contact with the grantor. In the event that Harper is deemed incapacitated or estranged by her own choice, guardianship of said assets may be petitioned by the legal guardian. I read the line again, estranged by her own choice. That was the play. That was why Beverly had manufactured the episodes. That was why she told the extended family I was unstable. That was why she told Evelyn I didn't want to talk to her. They were trying to prove estrangement. They were trying to prove I was mentally unfit to handle the money so that when the trust matured at 28, Douglas, and by extension, Beverly, could petition to control it. "You monsters," I whispered to the empty room. "You absolute, greedy monsters." The fear I had felt driving here vanished. The sadness I had felt about my father vanished. All that was left was the cold, hard logic of a data analyst looking at a fraudulent ledger. They had overplayed their hand. They thought they had blocked all the communication channels. They thought I was too beaten down to look in a dusty box. I pulled out my phone. My hand was rock steady now. I photographed every single envelope. I photographed the front, capturing Evelyn's handwriting. I photographed the back, capturing Beverly's notes. I photographed the contents of the letters, making sure the dates and signatures were legible. I photographed the photocopy of the will. I uploaded them to the Project Reclaim folder. I sent them to Mila. I sent them to the dummy email account. I carefully retied the bundle with the broken twine, but I didn't put it back. I shoved the letters into my backpack. I wasn't leaving this evidence here. I picked up the last letter in the stack. It was dated only 3 months ago. It was short. Harper. I am 80 years old. I do not have much time left to wait for you. I have kept the account open, but the board is pressuring me to reassign the beneficiary if you do not come forward. If one day you find this, if one day you read this line, please come find me. I am at the penthouse. You know the one. I will stand by you. I will fight for you. I am not like them. I am waiting. Grandma! I touched the paper. The ink was still dark. I will fight for you. For 27 years, nobody had fought for me. My father had stood by and watched me get slapped. My neighbors had turned their backs. My colleagues looked away. But somewhere in a penthouse in New York, a woman I had never met was holding a shield, waiting for me to get behind it. I closed the box and shoved it back behind the vacuum cleaner. I arranged the dust bunnies to look undisturbed. I stood up. My arm throbbed, but it felt distant now, like a memory of pain rather than the reality of it. I wasn't a victim of domestic abuse anymore. I was a plaintiff in what was about to be the biggest lawsuit this town had ever seen. I walked out of the storage room. I walked down the stairs. I didn't sneak. I walked with the heavy, deliberate steps of someone who owned the ground beneath their feet. I paused in the hallway. I looked at the fake camera with its blinking red light. I smiled at it. "You should have bought a real one, Beverly," I said softly, "because you are going to need the footage to prove you didn't see this coming." I walked out the front door, clutching my backpack strap with my good hand. I got into my car and locked the doors. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of stale coffee and rain. "Okay, Grandma," I said to the empty car. "I'm coming." I returned to Mila's apartment feeling like a fugitive carrying the crown jewels in a dirty gym bag. I had the audio file of Beverly admitting to her scheme, and I had the bundle of letters that proved she had been intercepting my life for a decade. Mila did not waste time with tea or sympathy. She took one look at the letters, specifically the black marker scrawled across my grandmother's handwriting, and she picked up her phone. "You are not going to a therapist," Mila said, her voice hard. "You are going to a shark." An hour later, we were walking into the lobby of Silver and Nash. It was a glass and steel fortress in the financial district of Brookhaven City, the kind of place where the air conditioning smelled like expensive cologne and the receptionists looked like runway models. I felt small in my jeans and oversized sweater, my arm throbbing under the bandage, my hair hiding the bruise on my cheek. Mila's sister, Nora, met us in a conference room that overlooked the city skyline. Nora was 10 years older than Mila, with sharp eyes and a haircut that suggested she did not have time for nonsense. She specialized in family law and asset disputes. I sat at the long mahogany table. I felt ridiculous. I was a girl who couldn't afford her own shampoo, sitting in a room that probably billed $600 an hour. "Put it all on the table," Nora said, closing the door. "Everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly." I unzipped my backpack. First, the photos of my face from the conditioner incident. Nora looked at them without flinching. Next, the audio file. I played it from my laptop. Beverly's voice filled the acoustic perfection of the room, shrill and clear. The house becomes mine. Protect our assets. She is dangerous. Then, the bank statements I had stolen, showing the transfers to BV Consulting. Finally, the bundle of letters. Nora picked up the letters. She examined the postmarks. She ran her thumb over the black marker where Beverly had written trash and intercepted. The silence in the room stretched for a long minute. Nora took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. When she looked up, the professional detachment was gone, replaced by a cold, predatory focus. "Harper," Nora said, her voice low, "this is not a domestic dispute. This is a criminal enterprise." She started listing the offenses, ticking them off on her fingers. First, we have assault and battery, domestic violence. That is clear from the photos and the recording. Second, we have forensic accounting evidence of embezzlement from your father's company. But this, she tapped the letters, this is federal. Intercepting mail is a felony. Tampering with an inheritance or trust communication? That is fraud. And given the amounts implied by the Hawthorne name, we are talking about grand larceny. I swallowed hard. I don't want my dad to go to jail. It was the first thing I had said. Despite everything, despite the silence in the bathroom, despite the years of neglect, I still had a pathetic, childish loyalty to the man who used to carry me on his shoulders. Nora looked at me with pity, but she didn't soften the blow. "Harper, look at the data," she said, using my own language. "Your father is the legal owner of the business Beverly is draining. He is the head of the household where you were abused. If this goes to court, he is liable. He is either a co-conspirator or he is negligent. There is no third option where he is just an innocent bystander." I looked down at my hands. "So if I fight her, I destroy him." No, Nora leaned forward. "He is already destroyed. He just doesn't know it yet. She is bleeding his business dry. She is planning to cut him out of the deed. If you do nothing, in 2 years he will be bankrupt and homeless too. Stopping her now is the only way to save whatever is left of him." She was right. I knew she was right. The math didn't lie. "Okay," I whispered. "What do we do?" Nora pulled a yellow legal pad toward her. "We fight a war on 2 fronts. The first is immediate protection. The second is long-term acquisition." She drew a line down the center of the page. "Front 1, the restraining order. We go to court today. We file for an emergency temporary restraining order, a TRO. We use the audio and the photos. This legally bars Beverly from coming near you, contacting you, or entering your workplace. It also creates an official paper trail that she is the aggressor. It neutralizes her threat to label you as unstable, because you struck first legally." "And front 2?" I asked. Nora tapped the stack of letters. "The Hawthorne connection. We need to verify if this trust fund is real, and if Evelyn Hawthorne is actually willing to back you. If she is who these letters say she is your heavy artillery. But we cannot just call the main line of Hawthorne Capital. Beverly might have flagged your name in their system years ago, or your father might have blocked access. So how do I reach her?" "You write a letter," Nora said. "A new one. You explain that you just found these. You include photocopies of the intercepted mail so she sees the dates and Beverly's notes. You prove to her that you didn't ignore her. You were silenced." "And then?" "And then we send it via private courier, marked personal and confidential, directly to her executive suite at Hawthorne Tower. We bypass the mailroom. We bypass the assistants. We spent the next 2 hours drafting. I sat at a side desk, typing the letter to my grandmother. It was the hardest thing I had ever written. How do you apologize for 10 years of silence you didn't cause? Dear Grandma Evelyn, my name is Harper. I am writing this from a lawyer's office because yesterday I found a box hidden in my house. I found every letter you sent me. I found the birthday cards. I found your pleas for me to come home. I never saw them. Not one. I was told you hated me. I was told you were dangerous. I am sending you copies of what I found. Please look at the back of the envelopes. That is my stepmother's handwriting. She kept me from you. I am 27 years old. I have no money. I am injured, but I am fighting back. You wrote that if I ever read your words, I should come find you. I am reading them now. I hope you are still waiting. Love, Harper. I printed it. I attached the photocopies of the intercepted envelopes. I sealed it in a thick Silver and Nash envelope. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was walking up the steps of the county courthouse with Nora. The building was gray and imposing, smelling of floor wax and misery. I felt a tremor of fear as we passed through the metal detectors. This was real. This wasn't a family argument anymore. This was the state of New York versus Beverly Lane. Nora handled everything. She spoke to the clerk in a language of codes and statutes. We went into a judge's chambers, an older man with tired eyes who looked at the photos of my face, listened to 30 seconds of the recording, and signed the paper without asking a single question. The stroke of his pen was loud in the quiet room. Granted. She will be served by a sheriff's deputy within 6 hours, Nora told me as we walked out into the bright afternoon sun. Once she is served, if she texts you, calls you, or drives past Mila's apartment, she goes to jail, no warnings. I held the copy of the order in my hand. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt like a shield. For the first time in 3 years, I had a boundary she couldn't cross without handcuffs. The fallout was instantaneous. At 7 o'clock that evening, I was sitting on Mila's floor, organizing my digital files. My phone, which had been silent all afternoon, suddenly lit up. It was my father's number. Nora had warned me. She said Beverly would use him. She said Beverly would try to bypass the order by using a proxy. I stared at the screen. The messages started coming in a torrent, one after another, vibrating against the floorboards. Dad. Harper, what have you done? The police just came to the door. Dad. Beverly is crying. She says you are ruining our reputation. Dad. You need to drop this immediately. You are acting like a child. And then, the tone changed. The syntax changed. It wasn't Douglas anymore. Dad. You ungrateful brat. How dare you? Dad. I will sue you for slander. I will make sure you never work in this town again. Dad. You think you are smart? You are nothing without us. You are going to crawl back here begging for forgiveness, and I will slam the door in your face. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to reply. I wanted to scream back. I wanted to text. I know about the money. I know about the theft. I know about the letters. But I heard Nora's voice in my head. Do not engage. Every response is ammunition. Silence is your weapon. I took a screenshot of the texts. I forwarded them to Nora's email. I forwarded them to the Project Reclaim Cloud folder. Then, I blocked my father's number. It felt like cutting off a limb. I sat there, staring at the blocked icon next to his name, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, the man who had bought me ice cream when I scraped my knee. He was gone. He had been replaced by a terrified puppet holding a phone for his wife. You okay? Mila asked, walking in with 2 bowls of instant ramen. I blocked him, I said, my voice hollow. Good, Mila said. She set the bowl down. Eat. You need strength for the next part. I slept on Mila's sofa that night. It was lumpy, and one of the springs dug into my hip. The streetlights outside cast strange shadows on the wall. But for the first time in years, I didn't wake up at 3 a.m. listening for footsteps. I didn't lie there wondering if I had locked the bathroom door properly. I didn't dread the sound of the morning alarm. I had fired the first shot. The silence from the other side wasn't peace, it was shock. They were regrouping, but so was I. The next morning, I drove to the post office. I didn't use the one in Maple Hollow where the clerk knew Beverly. I drove 3 towns over. I paid the extra fee for expedited, tracked, signature-required delivery. I watched the clerk weigh the thick envelope addressed to Evelyn Hawthorne, personal and confidential, Hawthorne Tower, New York City. It should arrive by tomorrow morning, the clerk said, handing me the receipt. I took the slip of paper. It was flimsy, printed with fading black ink. But as I walked out to my car, squinting against the sun, That receipt felt heavier than the car itself. It was a fuse. I had just lit it, and the spark was traveling down the wire, heading straight for the explosive charge that had been buried for 10 years. I got into my car and looked at the receipt one last time before tucking it into my wallet behind my driver's license. "Okay, Beverly," I whispered, putting the car in gear. "You wanted a war? You just invited the general to the battlefield." I drove back to the city, the skyline looming ahead of me. Somewhere in one of those towers, my grandmother was waiting, and for the first time, I believed she might actually answer. 3 weeks went by, 21 days of silence. I had tracked the package. I knew it had been delivered to the mailroom of Hawthorne Tower at 10:30 in the morning the day after I sent it. I had a signature from someone named J. Reynolds, but after that, nothing. I started to spiral. My analyst brain began to construct scenarios of failure. Maybe J. Reynolds was an intern who tossed it in the shredder. Maybe Evelyn was senile and didn't understand what she was reading. Maybe she had read it, looked at the photos of my bruised face, and decided that I was too much trouble. Just another messy relative looking for a payout. I went to work. I came home to Mila's apartment. I slept on the lumpy sofa. I checked my email every 15 minutes until my thumb cramped. By the third Tuesday, I had resigned myself to the fact that I was alone. I had the restraining order, and I had my job, and that was going to have to be enough. I started looking at listings for studio apartments in the bad part of town, calculating how many meals I could skip to afford a security deposit. It was a rainy afternoon. The sky was a bruised purple color, dumping buckets of water onto the city. I had left work early because of a migraine that was splitting my skull in two. I was standing at Mila's tiny kitchen sink, scrubbing a pot with a sponge that had seen better days, listening to the rain hammer against the window unit air conditioner. Then the doorbell rang. It wasn't the tentative buzz of a delivery driver or the polite knock of a neighbor. It was a solid, continuous press. Ring! I froze, my hands covered in soap suds. My first thought, instantly and irrationally, was Beverly. Even with the restraining order, my body reacted with a jolt of cortisol. Mila was sitting at the small dining table working on her laptop. She jumped up. "I'll get it." She went to the door and peered through the peephole. She went perfectly still. She stayed there for 5 seconds, then 10. When she turned back to look at me, her face was drained of color. "Harper," she whispered, her eyes wide. "There is a woman out there. She looks expensive, and there is a guy in a black suit who looks like he kills people for a living. And behind them, parked right in front of the hydrant, is a car that costs more than my entire college education." My heart stopped. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, my breath catching in my throat. "Is she wool?" I asked. "She looks like the Queen of England if the Queen shopped on Fifth Avenue," Mila said. I walked to the door. My legs felt like they were moving through water. I unlocked the deadbolt. I turned the handle. The hallway of Mila's apartment building smelled like boiled cabbage and old carpet, but standing on the welcome mat was a figure who seemed to bring her own atmosphere with her. She was small, maybe 5'2", but she held herself with a posture that made her seem 7 feet tall. She had short silver hair cut in a sharp, modern bob. She was wearing a camel-colored cashmere coat that looked softer than butter, and underneath, a dark silk blouse. Her face was lined with age, but her jaw was sharp, and her eyes, gray, piercing, and terrifyingly intelligent, were locked onto mine. Standing behind her was a man in a dark suit holding a briefcase. He looked like a monolith. The woman didn't smile. She just looked at me, scanning my face, my cheap sweater, the bandage that was still visible peeking out from my sleeve. "You are Harper," she stated. It wasn't a question. Her voice was crisp, authoritative, with a hint of a mid-Atlantic accent that spoke of old money and private schools. "Yes," I managed to choke out. "I am Evelyn Hawthorne," she said, "and I believe you have something of mine, my letters." The man behind her stepped forward and handed me a card. It was thick, heavy cardstock, embossed with silver lettering. Hawthorne Capital Group, Sterling Calder, General Counsel. I held the card. It felt cold and hard in my hand. May we come in? Evelyn asked. She glanced at the peeling paint on the doorframe, not with disgust, but with a sort of clinical assessment. Yes, I said, stepping back. Please, come in. They stepped into the tiny living room. Mila was standing by the sofa, looking like she wanted to curtsy or run away. The apartment was cluttered. There were clothes drying on a rack, piles of paperwork on the floor from our legal research, and the lingering smell of last night's takeout. Evelyn stood in the center of the room. She looked at the lumpy sofa with the sleeping bag thrown over it. She looked at the stack of instant noodle cups on the counter. She looked at the damp stain on the ceiling. She turned to me. Her expression softened, the steel in her eyes melting into something that looked painfully like grief. How long? She asked quietly. How long have you been living like this because of them? I've been here a few weeks, I stammered. But before this, it wasn't much better. Evelyn placed her handbag, a black leather Hermes bag that probably cost $40,000, onto Mila's scratched IKEA table. She opened it and pulled out a thick envelope. It was the one I had sent. She took out the stack of photocopied letters, the ones with Beverly's black marker scrawled across the back. I read them, she said. I read every single one, and then I read your cover letter, and then I had Mr. Calder here verify the restraining order you filed. She took a step closer to me. I could smell her perfume. It was subtle, floral, and expensive. I needed to see you, she said. I needed to look you in the eye, because for 10 years, I was told that you were the one throwing my letters away. I was told that you were a troubled, hateful child who wanted nothing to do with the old witch. I never knew, I whispered, the tears finally spilling over. I swear, Grandma, I never saw a single one until 3 days ago. I know, she said. She reached out. Her hand was small, the skin paper-thin, but her grip on my arm was surprisingly strong. When I saw the handwriting on the back of those envelopes, trash, intercepted, I recognized it immediately, Beverly. The way she said the name was like spitting out a piece of gristle. I broke. I stood there in my friend's dirty kitchen and I sobbed. I didn't cry pretty tears. I cried ugly, heaving sobs that shook my whole body. It was the release of a decade of rejection. I wasn't the 27-year-old data analyst anymore. I was the 17-year-old girl who had lost her mother and had been waiting for someone, anyone, to come save her. Evelyn didn't hug me immediately. She let me cry. She stood there, her hand on my arm, anchoring me. I tried. Harper, she said, her voice fierce and low. You have to know that, after your mother died, I tried to call. Douglas hung up on me. I sent lawyers. They were turned away at the door. Beverly sent me a cease and desist order 5 years ago, claiming that I was harassing a minor and causing you emotional distress. She threatened to sue me for intentional infliction of emotional trauma if I didn't stay away. I looked up, wiping my eyes with my sleeve. She threatened to sue you? She knew I wouldn't risk dragging your name through the tabloids, Evelyn said. She knew I would back off to protect you from a public spectacle. She weaponized my own love for you against me. Mr. Calder cleared his throat. Ms. Lane, if I may. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a file. Your grandmother has maintained a trust for you since you were born, he said, his tone professional and dry. However, 3 years ago, right around the time you moved back home, we received a set of documents from your father. They were petitions to change the guardianship of the trust. Change it to who? I asked, sniffing. To Douglas Lane and Beverly Lane, Mr. Calder said. The argument was that you were demonstrating signs of, quote, severe financial irresponsibility and mental instability, and that upon the trust maturing at 28, you would be a danger to yourself if given access to the funds. My blood ran cold. The rent, I whispered. The broken vase. The episodes. She was manufacturing evidence. Precisely, Evelyn said. Her eyes narrowed. She was building a case to declare you incompetent so she could get her claws into my money. She was playing a long game. Harper, A very patient, very cruel long game. I hired private investigators, Evelyn continued. I had men watching the house from down the street, but they couldn't see inside. They reported that you went to work. You came home. You looked normal. Without you reaching out to me, without proof of abuse, my hands were tied. If I intervened without cause, they could have blocked me legally for years. She picked up the photos of my face, the ones I had sent her. But then you sent me this, she said. Her voice trembled with a rage so deep it vibrated in the room. You gave me the smoking gun. You gave me the cause. I didn't want to drag you into the drama, I said weakly. I just wanted you to know I didn't hate you. Evelyn laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. Drama? She repeated. She looked at me, and a smile spread across her face. It wasn't a grandmotherly smile. It was a smile that belonged to a woman who had crushed competitors on Wall Street for 40 years. Harper, my dear, this is not drama, she said. This is war, and I am exceptionally good at winning wars. She turned to Mila, who was still standing by the sofa. You are the friend? Evelyn asked. Mila? Yes, ma'am, Mila squeaked. Thank you for harboring my granddaughter when she had nowhere else to go, Evelyn said. You will be compensated for your trouble and your discretion. She turned back to me. Pack your things, she commanded. What? I asked. Pack your bag. You are leaving. Tonight. But I have work tomorrow, I said, the habit of obligation still strong. And the restraining order hearing is next week. Mr. Calder will handle the hearing, Evelyn said, dismissing it with a wave of her hand. And as for work, you can commute from the city, but you are not staying in this apartment, and you are certainly not staying anywhere near that woman. Where am I going? Hawthorne Residences, Evelyn said. I own the building. It has 24-hour doormen, biometric security elevators, and walls thick enough to stop a tank. You will stay in the guest penthouse until we sort this out. Grandma, I said, I can't just leave. I have a lease with my dad. Well, a verbal one. Evelyn grabbed my shoulders. She forced me to look at her. Harper, she said firmly, you are the heiress to the Hawthorne legacy. You are done paying rent to people who abuse you. You are done using watered-down soap. You are done being small. She picked up the bottle of dish soap from the counter and dropped it into the trash can. Get your bag. I looked at Mila. Mila nodded frantically. Go, she mouthed. Go with the billionaire. I'll be fine. I ran to the bedroom. I threw my few clothes into my backpack. I grabbed my laptop. I grabbed the hard drive with the evidence. When I walked back out 5 minutes later, Mr. Calder took the bag from my hand. He didn't ask. He just took it. We walked out of the apartment building. The rain was still pouring, but the driver was waiting with a massive black umbrella. He held it over us as we walked to the car, a sleek black Maybach that looked like a spaceship parked on the cracked pavement. I slid into the leather seat. It was warm. It smelled of rich leather and safety. Evelyn slid in beside me. The door closed with a heavy thud, shutting out the sound of the rain, the city, and the last 3 years of my life. As the car pulled away, gliding over the potholes as if they didn't exist, Evelyn reached into the pocket of the seat and pulled out a bottle of water. It was glass. She handed it to me. Rest now. Harper, she said, patting my knee. We have a busy day tomorrow. We are going to audit everything. We are going to freeze their accounts. And then, we are going to pay them a visit. I looked out the window as the city lights blurred past. I touched the receipt in my wallet. They think I'm alone, I whispered. Evelyn smiled in the dim light of the car cabin. It was a wolf's smile. They are about to find out, she said, that you are the most crowded room they have ever walked into. The transition from Mila's lumpy sofa to the guest penthouse at Hawthorne Residences was jarring. I woke up on my first morning in a bed that felt like a cloud, wrapped in sheets with a thread count higher than my entire net worth. The room was silent. There were no creaking floorboards. There were no aggressive footsteps in the hallway. There was only the low, reassuring hum of the central air conditioning and the distant view of the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling glass. I walked to the window. Down on the street, life was chaotic, but up here on the 42nd floor, I was untouchable. The building had a 24-hour concierge, 3 layers of biometric security to access the elevators, and a doorman who looked like a retired Secret Service agent. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't check the lock on the bathroom door before I brushed my teeth. But I wasn't here to vacation. I was here to work. At 9 o'clock sharp, a car took me to Hawthorne Tower. This time, I didn't walk past the building as a stranger. I walked in through the private executive entrance, flanked by Mr. Calder. We went straight to the war room on the top floor. It was a sleek conference room with a table long enough to land a plane on. Evelyn was already there, sitting at the head, looking immaculate in a navy blazer. "Good morning, Harper," she said, not looking up from her iPad. "Grab a coffee. The team is arriving in 5 minutes." The team was a terrifyingly efficient assembly of legal and financial firepower. There was Sterling Calder, the general counsel, representing the Hawthorne Empire. There was Nora from Silver and Nash, representing me personally in the domestic and family law sector. And then there were the specialists, a forensic accountant named Marcus and a private investigator named Silas, who looked like he hadn't slept in a decade. This was the alliance. "Here is the situation," Evelyn began, standing up as soon as the door clicked shut. "We are fighting a war on 3 fronts. First, the physical safety of Harper Lane. Second, the preservation of the trust assets. Third, the exposure of criminal fraud within Lane Home Supply." She pointed to the center of the table. "Lay it out." We combined our data sets. I put down my flash drive containing the audio recording, the photos of my injuries, and the stolen bank statements. Silas, the investigator, added a thick dossier of surveillance photos and background checks. Marcus, the accountant, opened his laptop and projected a complex spreadsheet onto the wall. "I have reviewed the preliminary data Harper pulled from the cloud accounting software," Marcus said, his voice dry and precise. "It is crude, but effective. The entity, BV Consulting, is receiving monthly payments ranging from $2,000 to $5,000. These are coded as operating expenses, marketing, logistics, efficiency consulting." "Beverly doesn't know the first thing about logistics," I said, staring at the numbers. "She thinks supply chain is just ordering shoes online." "Exactly," Marcus nodded. "I traced the EIN, the tax identification number, of BV Consulting. It is a shell company registered to a P.O. box in Brookhaven. But here's where it gets interesting. The bank account associated with BV Consulting has an automatic sweep set up. Every Friday, the balance is transferred to a holding company called Lakeside Holdings, LLC. He clicked a button. A new slide appeared. It was a deed. Lakeside Holdings, LLC is the legal owner of a residential property at 42 Oak Creek Drive, in the Lakeside Vista community. My breath hitched. Lakeside Vista was the most expensive condo development in the county. It was where the doctors and the tech CEOs lived. "Who owns Lakeside Holdings?" Nora asked, leaning forward. "The registered agent is a lawyer," Marcus said. "But the beneficial owner is listed in the operating agreement." He zoomed in on the signature at the bottom of the document. "Beverly A. Lane." The room went silent. "She bought a condo," I whispered. "My dad is stressing about lumber prices. He is deferring maintenance on his own house. He is making me pay $1,500 a month in rent to cover inflation. And she bought a luxury condo." "She bought it cash," Marcus added. $350,000, paid via wire transfer 18 months ago. That matches the timeline of when the consulting fees ramped up, combined with a significant drain on the store's retained earnings. I felt sick. I looked at the graph. The red line of the store's cash reserves plummeted exactly as the blue line of Beverly's assets skyrocketed. It wasn't just theft. It was a parasite killing its host. Evelyn stood by the window, looking out at the city. Her face was hard. "I knew it," she said softly. 10 years ago, when Douglas first married her. I tried to keep a hand in the business. I had a small equity stake in Lane Home Supply, an investment I made when your mother was still alive to help them expand. I treated it as a test. I asked Douglas for quarterly reports. I wanted to see if he could manage the growth. She turned to me. For the first 2 years, the reports were fine. Then, Beverly took over the books. The reports stopped coming. When I asked Douglas about it, he told me that Beverly said I was micromanaging and that they wanted to buy me out. They sent me a check for my equity. It was pennies on the dollar. But I took it. I wanted to see what they would do without my oversight. They robbed the place, I said. She robbed the place, Evelyn corrected. Douglas just held the door open for her. Nora cleared her throat. This changes the legal strategy. We are not just looking at a restraining order anymore. This is grand larceny. This is tax fraud. If we take this to the district attorney, Beverly goes to prison. And Douglas? I asked. If he signed the checks, is he an accomplice? Technically, yes, Nora said. But if we can prove he was coerced, or that he was unaware of the ultimate destination of the funds, the condo, we might be able to paint him as a victim of fraud rather than a co-conspirator. That is the goal, Evelyn said firmly. We destroy her. We save him, but only if he is willing to be saved. She looked at me. Harper, this is where you come in. Me? I need you to visualize this, Evelyn said. Marcus has the raw numbers, but Douglas is a simple man. He understands lumber and nails. He doesn't understand shell companies and LLCs. If we show him a spreadsheet, his eyes will glaze over. I need you to build a presentation that he cannot ignore. I need you to show him, dollar for dollar, how his wife stole his retirement. I nodded. This was my language. For the next 6 hours, I didn't think about the pain in my arm or the trauma of the bathroom. I entered a flow state. I took Marcus's data exports and pulled them into my analytics software. I built a timeline. On the top half, I plotted the moments of family austerity, the times Douglas told me he couldn't afford to fix the shower, the times he said business was slow, the times Beverly raised my rent. On the bottom half, I plotted the outflows, the consulting fees, the cash withdrawals, the purchase of the condo, the purchase of the car. I connected them with bright red lines. April 12th. Douglas denies Harper money for car repairs. April 14th. BV. Consulting receives $4,000. April 15th. Beverly books a spa weekend at the Ritz. It was a story told in math. It was irrefutable. As I worked, I felt Evelyn watching me. She wasn't hovering. She was observing. At one point, she brought me a fresh coffee. You have the eye, she said quietly, looking at the complex web of data on my screen. The eye? The Hawthorne eye, she said. You see the patterns. You don't get emotional about the numbers. You get curious. Your mother had it too. Though she used it for art, you use it for truth. She paused. You are not just a victim in this room. Harper, you are an asset. When this is over, we need to talk about your future. You are wasting your brain at that fintech startup. A warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. For the first time in my life, someone wasn't telling me I was a burden. They were telling me I was valuable. By 4 o'clock, the strategy was set. Nora would file a petition in probate court to remove Douglas as the guardian of my future trust fund, citing breach of fiduciary duty and failure to protect the beneficiary. This would force a legal review of his finances. Simultaneously, we would serve Beverly with the forensic audit findings. We wouldn't go to the police immediately. We would hold the threat of prison over her head to force a settlement, one that involved her walking away with nothing. We have to be clean, Evelyn instructed the room. No leaks to the press, no physical intimidation. We use the law. We use the data. If we get down in the mud with her, she wins, because she lives in the mud. We stay high. We stay spotless. As we were wrapping up, my phone buzzed on the conference table. I had blocked Douglas, but I hadn't blocked the shared family group chat. a relic from years ago that rarely saw activity. A message popped up. It was from Beverly, sent from her own phone this time. Beverly, I know you are reading this. Harper, you think you are smart running to a lawyer? Douglas is devastated. We are going to sue you for slander. We are going to sue you for the emotional distress you have caused this family. I have already spoken to my attorney. You better lawyer up, you ungrateful little brat. I read it out loud. Sterling Calder, the general counsel, laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound. Her attorney? Calder asked. Let me guess. The strip mall guy who handled her speeding ticket? Probably, I said. She is threatening a slander suit, Nora said, smiling. That is perfect. In a slander suit. Truth is the absolute defense. By suing us, she opens herself up to discovery. She opens the door for us to depose her under oath. She is walking right into the trap. Should I reply? I asked. No, Evelyn said. Let her talk. Let her text Douglas. Let her spin her web. The more she denies, the harder she falls when we drop the evidence. Evelyn stood up and walked to the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the city. Harper, she said, come here. I walked over to stand beside her. We looked down at the sprawling metropolis of Brookhaven. From up here, the cars looked like toys. The problems of my old life, the leaky faucet, the broken shelf, the rent money, felt microscopic. Do you see that? Evelyn pointed to the horizon. That is the world. It is big, and it is indifferent. It does not care if you are good or bad. It only cares if you are strong. She turned to look at me. Her gray eyes were fierce. Tomorrow, we invite Douglas to a meeting. We are going to show him your presentation. We are going to break his heart to save his life. It will be painful. He might hate you for it in the moment. She paused. Are you ready to be the villain in his story for a little while, so that you can be the hero of your own? I thought about my father standing in the bathroom door, holding his coffee, looking at my bleeding arm and asking Beverly if she was okay. I thought about the years of silence. I thought about the box of stolen letters. I looked at the red lines on my chart, the lines that proved he had chosen a thief over his own daughter. I took a breath. The air in the penthouse was crisp and clean. I'm not afraid of being the villain anymore, Grandma, I said, my voice steady. I'm just ready to be free. Good, Evelyn said. Then let's finish this. She turned back to the table where the lawyers were packing up their briefcases. Mr. Calder, she said sharply, send the invitation. Tell Douglas Lane that the Hawthorne family office requests his presence regarding an urgent compliance matter with the trust. Tell him to bring his wife. And if she refuses? Calder asked. She won't, I said, speaking up. She thinks she's winning. She thinks this meeting is about her getting control of the money. Greed will bring her right to our doorstep. Evelyn smiled. See? She is learning already. We stood there, 2 generations of Hawthorne women, watching the lights of the city turn on one by one. The trap was set, the data was locked, the army was assembled. Tomorrow, we would go to war, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who was going to win. The strategy shifted on Tuesday morning. Originally, we had planned to summon them to the Hawthorne Tower, to intimidate them with glass walls and skyline views, but Evelyn, with her terrifying instinct for psychological warfare, changed the venue. She wanted to do it at the house. She wanted to return to the scene of the crime. Mr. Calder sent the courier packet. It was a masterpiece of ambiguity. The letter stated that the Hawthorne family office was conducting a final compliance review of the trust fund regarding Harper Lane and required an in-person meeting with the guardians to clarify the asset allocation. To a guilty mind like Beverly's, that sounded like a payout. It sounded like the bank was finally opening the vault. We arrived at the house in Maple Hollow at 2:00 in the afternoon. We came in a convoy. The black Maybach led the way, followed by a discreet SUV containing Silas and 2 private security contractors. I sat in the back of the car next to Evelyn. I was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that Evelyn had paid for. my hair pulled back in a severe, tight bun. The bandage on my arm was hidden beneath the silk lining of my jacket. The bruise on my face had faded to a faint yellow shadow, but I didn't cover it with makeup. I wanted it visible. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw the performance Beverly had prepared. The lawn was freshly mowed. There were new flower pots on the porch. The front door was open, and she was standing there, wearing a pastel dress that looked like something a church-going mother would wear to Easter Sunday. It was nauseating. We stepped out of the car. The air smelled of fresh mulch and desperation. Douglas was standing behind Beverly, wearing his best blazer, the one he usually saved for funerals. He looked nervous, his eyes darting between the luxury cars and the neighbors who were peering through their blinds. I walked up the path. I didn't look down. I didn't shrink. I walked flanked by Nora and Mr. Calder, with Evelyn leading the charge. "Harper!" Beverly exclaimed, throwing her arms wide as if she hadn't screamed at me to get out just days ago. Her voice was syrup thick. "Oh, honey, we were so worried. You just ran off without a word. Come in, come in. I made iced tea." She moved to hug me. It was a power move, a way to physically reclaim her territory. "Step back," Nora said. It wasn't a request. It was a command, delivered with the sharp projection of a litigator. Beverly froze, her arms suspended in midair. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she plastered it back on. "I beg your pardon?" She laughed nervously. "I am just hugging my daughter." "Stepdaughter," Nora corrected, "and you have been served with a temporary restraining order. You are required by law to maintain a distance of 50 feet. If you touch her, we will have the officers in the SUV arrest you immediately. We are here solely for the meeting regarding the trust. Do not confuse this with a social call." Douglas turned pale. He looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time, he saw the suit. He saw the coldness in my eyes. He saw the lawyers. "Let's go inside," Evelyn said, breezing past them as if she owned the deed. We gathered in the living room. Beverly had set out a spread of cookies and crystal glasses on the coffee table, the same table she had once stripped of my mother's books. I sat on one side of the room with my team. Beverly and Douglas sat on the sofa opposite us. The distance between us was only 6 feet, but it felt like an ocean. "So," Beverly started, smoothing her skirt, her eyes darting to Mr. Calder's briefcase. "We assume this is about the distribution? We have been saying for years that Harper needs professional management for her inheritance. We are so glad you finally agree." Evelyn didn't answer her. She reached into her oversized tote bag and pulled out a stack of papers. It wasn't the trust documents. It was the bundle of letters, the ones tied with the broken twine. She threw them onto the coffee table. They landed with a heavy thud, sliding across the polished wood and knocking over a crystal coaster. "Let's start with these," Evelyn said. Douglas squinted at the pile. "What is this?" "You know what they are." "Douglas," Evelyn said, her voice dangerously quiet. "They are the letters I sent to my granddaughter for the last 10 years. The letters you told me she refused to read." Douglas picked one up. He looked at the handwriting. His face flushed a deep, shameful red. I saw a few of these come in," he stammered. "But Bev said they were just—" He trailed off, looking at his wife. "They were hate mail," Beverly interjected quickly, her voice rising in pitch. "They were full of poison. That woman was trying to turn Harper against us. Doug, I intercepted them to protect the peace of this family. I didn't want Harper to be upset by her toxicity." "Is that so?" Mr. Calder asked. He picked up the top letter. He adjusted his glasses. "Let me read a random excerpt from the letter dated August 12th, 2019. He cleared his throat and read in a monotone voice. "My dearest Harper, I hope your junior year is starting well. I saw a painting in a gallery today that reminded me of your mother's work. It had that same beautiful use of blue. I have put a small amount of money into your savings account for books. Please know I am always proud of you." Mr. Calder lowered the paper. "Poison," he said dryly. "Truly horrific stuff." "That's a fake," Beverly snapped. "She wrote that yesterday to frame me." "The postmark is from 4 years ago," Nora pointed out. "And we have the forensic analysis of the ink if you would like to challenge it in court. But we are not here to debate your mail fraud. Mrs. Lane, that is a federal crime the postal inspectors will handle later. We are here to talk about the money." Beverly's eyes lit up again. "Right, the money." "Harper," Evelyn said. "Show them." I stood up. My hands were not shaking. I felt a strange, cold clarity. I took my laptop out of my bag. I connected it to the HDMI cable of the large television mounted above the fireplace, the television Douglas stared at every night to avoid talking to me. The screen flickered to life. "I did a comprehensive analysis of the operating capital of Lane Home Supply," I said. My voice was steady, the voice I used for board presentations at Brightline. A graph appeared on the screen. It showed a steep, jagged red line plunging downward over 3 years. "Dad," I said, addressing him directly, "you told me last year that you couldn't afford to fix the plumbing because lumber prices were up 30%. You told me the margins were too thin." "They were," Douglas said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The market has been brutal." "The market was down 4%, I corrected. "Your margins were down 40%, and this is why." I clicked the next slide. It showed the transfers, BV, consulting, month after month, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. "Who is BV Consulting?" Douglas asked, frowning. "I don't recognize that vendor." "You signed the checks, Dad," I said. "Or at least, your digital signature did." "I sign a lot of things," he mumbled. "Bev handles the accounts payable." "BV Consulting," I said, "stands for Beverly Vane. Her maiden name. It is a shell company." I clicked again. The screen filled with the deed to the condo at Lakeside Vista. And this is where the money went. $350,000 of retained earnings from the store, siphoned out over 18 months, used to purchase a luxury property at 42 Oak Creek Drive. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Douglas stared at the screen. He blinked. He looked at the signature on the deed. "Lakeside Vista?" he whispered. "Bev, that's the complex you said your friend lived in, the one you visit on Tuesdays." Beverly's face had gone the color of ash. She stood up, smoothing her dress with frantic, jerky movements. "This is ridiculous," she spat. "Harper is manipulating the data. She works in computers. She can make anything look like anything. That money was for marketing, for brand expansion, and the condo is an investment property for the business. I was going to surprise you, Doug." "An investment property solely in your name?" Nora asked. "Purchased with embezzled funds? And hidden from the primary business owner?" "Dad," I said, clicking to the next slide. It was the timeline, the red lines connecting his denials of my needs to her purchases. "Look at the dates. The day you told me I had to pay $1,500 in rent because inflation was hurting us, she transferred $6,000 to pay for custom drapery at the condo." Douglas looked at the chart. He looked at the specific date, April 14th. "I remember that day," he said softly. "I had to fire 2 guys from the warehouse that week. I let Mike go. Mike had 3 kids. I told him we were bleeding cash." He turned to Beverly. His voice was trembling, not with fear this time, but with a dawning horror. "You bought curtains?" he asked. "I fired Mike, and you bought curtains?" "It's complicated, Doug," Beverly shrieked. "You don't understand high-level finance. I was diversifying our portfolio." "She stole from you, Dad," I said. "She stole from the store. She stole from me. And she stole your reputation." "That is enough!" Beverly screamed. She slammed her hand onto the coffee table, rattling the crystal. "Get out! Get out of my house, you ungrateful little leech! I took you in. I gave you a roof. And you bring these vultures in here to ruin me?" "We aren't done," Nora said calmly. "There is one more piece of data." I minimized the presentation. I opened the media player. "This is from last Tuesday," I said. The night I broke the shelf. I pressed play. The sound was clear and high fidelity, the rush of the shower water, the crash of the glass. You pushed me. My voice on the recording wheezed. Beverly, you pushed me into the glass. I did not. Beverly's recorded scream filled the living room. You slipped. You were drunk. Douglas flinched as if he had been slapped. He stared at the speakers. Then came the hallway conversation, the whispers. She has to go. Doug, because when you retire, and we transfer the deed to the trust like we planned, we don't want her having any claim. The house becomes mine. Ours, only ours. The recording ended. Douglas sat there. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. He looked at his hands. He looked at the ceiling. And then he looked at Beverly. You told me, he said, his voice cracking, that you wanted to put the house in the trust to protect it from taxes. You told me it was for Harper's benefit eventually. It was, Beverly insisted, but her eyes were wild now, darting around the room like a trapped animal. Doug, listen to me. She edited that tape. She is framing me. I heard you, Douglas said. He stood up. He wasn't a tall man, but in that moment, anger gave him a sudden, rigid height. I heard you whispering outside her door while she was bleeding. You weren't worried about her. You were worried about the deed. He slammed his hand onto the table. The sound was like a gunshot. I fired Mike, he roared. I let my daughter pay rent. I ignored my own mother-in-law. Because I trusted you. I thought you were saving us. I was, Beverly screamed back, dropping the facade entirely. Her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. I was saving you from being a loser. Doug, you are a small-town shopkeeper with no ambition. I built us a life. I deserve that money. I deserve that condo. I put up with your moping and your bratty, depressing daughter for 10 years. She turned on me. Her eyes were black holes of rage. You, she hissed. You ruined everything, you sneaky, spying little rat. She grabbed a heavy crystal tumbler from the table. She didn't think. She just reacted. She hurled it at me. Beverly, no! Douglas shouted. I didn't move. I didn't have to. The tumbler missed my head by inches, shattering against the fireplace behind me. Beverly lunged. She scrambled over the coffee table. Her fingers hooked into claws, aiming for my face. I will kill you, she shrieked. Suddenly, the air in the room shifted. The two men from the SUV, who had been standing silently by the hallway entrance, moved with a speed that defied their size. One of them caught Beverly by the waist before she could reach me. He spun her around and pinned her arms behind her back. It wasn't a gentle hold. It was a professional takedown. Let me go, she screamed, kicking and thrashing. Get off me! Ms. Lane, the security officer said, his voice flat. You are in violation of a court-ordered restraining order. You have attempted physical assault in the presence of witnesses. Nora stood up. She smoothed her blazer. That, she said, pointing at the struggling Beverly, is aggravated assault, and since you just threw a projectile at my client, we are no longer talking about a civil settlement. She pulled out her phone. I am calling the sheriff, Nora said. We have the restraining order on file. We have the assault witnessed by 2 security officers and 3 lawyers. You are going to jail. Beverly, tonight. Beverly stopped thrashing. She looked at Douglas. Doug, she pleaded, the tears starting instantly, fake and hysterical. Doug, help me. They are hurting me. Tell them to stop. Tell them to get out of our house. Douglas looked at her. He looked at the woman he had defended for a decade. He looked at the woman who had convinced him to ignore his own child. He looked at the screen where the graph of his stolen money was still glowing. He sat back down on the sofa. He picked up his head and put it in his hands. This isn't our house, he mumbled into his palms. It never was. It was just another thing you were waiting to steal. Doug, she screamed. Don't let them take me. Take her, Douglas said. He didn't look up. Just take her away. Beverly began to scream. It was a raw, guttural sound of a narcissist who realizes the mirror has finally shattered. She screamed about her rights. She screamed that it was a conspiracy. She screamed that I was a thief. The security guards dragged her out of the room, her heels dragging on the hardwood floor she had obsessed over. I stood there, watching her go. I felt my heart hammering in my chest, but my hands were still steady. I looked at my father. He was slumped on the couch, a broken man in a quiet room. The silence that rushed back in after Beverly's screams faded was deafening. Evelyn walked over to the table. She picked up the stack of letters. She placed them gently back in her bag. "Well," she said, adjusting her coat, "I believe the asset allocation has been clarified." She turned to me. "Are you ready to go, Harper?" I looked at Douglas one last time. He was weeping now, silent, shaking sobs that racked his shoulders. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He knew, and I knew, that we were far past that point. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." We walked out of the house, leaving the front door wide open. The final showdown took place 3 weeks later in Courtroom 4 of the Brookhaven County Courthouse. It was a sterile room with wood paneling that smelled of old polish and fluorescent lights that hummed with a low, headache-inducing frequency. This was where the permanent restraining order hearing and the emergency petition regarding the trust assets were to be heard. I sat at the plaintiff table. To my left was Nora, looking sharp in a crimson suit that screamed war. To her left was Mr. Calder, the picture of corporate lethality. Behind me, in the first row of the gallery, sat Evelyn Hawthorne. She sat with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, looking like a general observing a skirmish she had already won. Beverly arrived 5 minutes late. She swept into the room with a lawyer I recognized from a billboard on the highway, a man named Mr. Hannon, who wore a suit that was a size too large. Beverly was dressed in black, a mourning color intended to garner sympathy, and she had applied her makeup with a heavy hand, creating the illusion of sleepless nights and fragility. She dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue before she even sat down. She looked at me. She expected me to look away. She expected the cowed stepdaughter who apologized for existing. I looked right back at her. I held her gaze until she was the one who flinched and turned to whisper frantically to her attorney. The proceedings began with the Honorable Judge Vance presiding. He was a man known for his impatience with theatrics, which was bad news for Beverly. Nora led the charge. She didn't start with emotional appeals. She started with hard evidence. "Your Honor," Nora said, standing tall, "we are asking for a permanent order of protection based on a pattern of physical abuse, financial coercion, and psychological intimidation. We have submitted Exhibit A, an audio recording of the incident on November 19th. The audio played over the courtroom speakers. "I will kill you," Beverly's voice shrieked, distorted but undeniable. "Get out of my house, you ungrateful little leech." The sound of the glass shattering echoed in the quiet room. Beverly jumped up. "That is out of context. She provoked me. She was destroying my property." "Sit down, Mrs. Lane," Judge Vance snapped, peering over his glasses. "You speak when you are addressed. Another outburst like that and I will hold you in contempt." Beverly sank back into her chair, her face flushing a blotchy red. Nora continued. She displayed the photos of my face from the conditioner incident. She displayed the medical report from the urgent care clinic detailing the laceration on my arm. Then came the financial expert. Marcus took the stand. He was dry, clinical, and devastating. "Your Honor," Marcus said, pointing to a chart projected on the screen. "Between January 2020 and October 2023, approximately $420,000 was transferred from Lane Home Supply to a shell entity known as B. Chauvy Consulting. The sole beneficiary of this entity is Beverly Lane. These funds were categorized as business expenses, but were used to purchase personal assets, including a condominium at Lakeside Vista." "Objection!" Mr. Hannon shouted, standing up. "My client provided consulting services. She was a partner in the business." "We have the tax returns," Marcus replied calmly. "BV. Consulting listed 0 employees and 0 operating costs. It is a pass-through vehicle for embezzlement." The judge looked at the numbers. He looked at Beverly. His expression shifted from annoyance to disgust. Then came the moment I had dreaded and needed in equal measure. Douglas Lane was called to the stand. My father looked 20 years older than he had a month ago. His suit hung loosely on his frame. He walked to the witness stand with a shuffle, avoiding eye contact with everyone: Beverly, me, the judge. Nora handled him gently, but she didn't spare him. "Mr. Lane?" Nora asked. "Did you authorize the purchase of a condominium at 42 Oak Creek Drive?" "No," Douglas whispered. "Speak up, please," the judge instructed. "No," Douglas said, his voice cracking. "I did not." "Were you aware that your wife was transferring store funds to her personal accounts while you were laying off employees?" "No," Douglas said. He looked down at his hands. "I trusted her to handle the books. She told me we were broke. She told me Harper was a drain on our finances." "And regarding the physical safety of your daughter," Nora continued, "on the night of November 19th, did you witness your wife shove your daughter?" Douglas hesitated. He looked at Beverly. She was staring at him with wide, pleading eyes, silently begging him to lie, to save her, to stick to the script one last time. Then he looked at me. He saw the bandage still on my arm. "I heard the crash," Douglas said softly. "I saw Harper bleeding, and I heard Beverly say she wanted to get rid of her so we could keep the house." "Did you intervene?" Nora asked. "No," Douglas said. A tear tracked down his cheek. "I asked Beverly if she was okay." The admission hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was the final nail in the coffin of our family. But it was also the truth. Judge Vance didn't need to hear much more. He called a recess for 30 minutes, then returned with his ruling. "I have seen enough," Judge Vance said, stacking his papers. "The court grants the permanent order of protection. Beverly Lane is to have no contact with Harper Lane or Evelyn Hawthorne for a period of 10 years. Furthermore, regarding the financial discrepancies, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for a criminal investigation into fraud and embezzlement." Beverly gasped. "Criminal? But I was just managing the family money." "As for the assets," the judge continued, ignoring her, "the court finds that the funds used to maintain the marital home in Maple Hollow were significantly commingled with assets that should have been held in trust for Harper Lane. Furthermore, the forensic evidence suggests the home equity was preserved only by the theft of business capital. Therefore, the court orders the immediate liquidation of the Maple Hollow property to satisfy the debts to Lane Home Supply and to provide restitution to the victim." "Liquidation?" Beverly shrieked. She stood up, knocking her chair over. "You can't sell my house. That is my house. I decorated it. I made it what it is." "It is not your house, Mrs. Lane," the judge said coldly. "It is a crime scene, and now it is an asset for restitution. Case closed." The gavel banged. Beverly dissolved. It wasn't a graceful fainting spell. It was a tantrum. She screamed at her lawyer. She screamed at the judge. And then she turned to me. "You ungrateful brat!" she howled as the bailiff moved toward her. "I gave you everything. I tried to fix you. You are nothing without me. You will never be happy. You are just a lonely little girl." I watched her being escorted out, her mascara running, her voice echoing in the hallway. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt tired. She was a storm that had finally blown itself out. The courtroom cleared. I packed my bag slowly. "Harper." I turned. Douglas was standing at the gate of the gallery. He held his hat in his hands, twisting the brim. "I am sorry," he said. His voice was hollow. "I know that doesn't fix anything. I know I can't take back the last 10 years, but I am sorry. I was weak, and I let her hurt you because I didn't want to be alone." He looked at Evelyn, who was standing behind me like a sentinel. He looked at the lawyers. He knew he had lost me to a world he couldn't enter. "I will sign whatever papers they send," he said. "I will testify against her. I will do whatever it takes to pay you back." I looked at him. I saw the father who used to teach me how to mix paint in the store. I saw the man who had grieved my mother, but I also saw the man who had stood by while I was erased. I didn't step forward to hug him. I didn't offer him absolution. "I don't want the money, Dad," I said quietly. "The lawyers will handle that. I just want you to be better." I paused, adjusting the strap of my bag. "I hope you live the rest of your life honest with yourself," I said. "That is the only repayment I need." I turned and walked out of the courtroom. I didn't look back to see if he was crying. I couldn't carry his grief anymore. I had my own life to carry. 2 days later, I returned to Maple Hollow one last time. The house was being prepped for sale. The court-appointed liquidators had already removed the furniture. The gray sofas were gone. The expensive art was gone. The curtains Beverly had bought with the stolen money were taken down, leaving the windows bare. I walked through the empty rooms. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors. It felt smaller than I remembered, without the furniture, without the tension. It was just a box made of wood and drywall. It wasn't a prison. It wasn't a palace. It was just a house. I walked up the stairs to the master bathroom. The shelf I had broken had been removed, leaving just the brackets on the wall. The shower was dry. The expensive bottles of imported Italian products were gone, swept away into boxes for auction. I reached into my bag. I pulled out a bottle of conditioner. It was a $3 bottle from the drugstore, the cheap kind that smelled like synthetic coconut, the kind Beverly had thrown in the trash because it was ugly. I walked to the empty niche in the shower wall. I placed the bottle in the center of the shelf. It stood there, bright and tacky and defiant against the beige tile. "My hair," I whispered to the empty room. "My house, my rules." It was a small gesture, a silly ritual, but as I looked at that plastic bottle, I felt the last knot in my chest loosen. I wasn't asking for permission anymore. I wasn't stealing scraps of luxury. I was claiming my space. I turned and walked out of the bathroom. I walked down the stairs, through the living room, and out the front door. Evelyn was waiting for me by the car. The autumn wind was blowing, stripping the last leaves from the trees on the lawn. She was holding a folder. "Is it done?" she asked. "It's done," I said. She handed me the folder. "This is for you," she said. "It is not the trust fund paperwork. Mr. Calder handled that yesterday. This is something else." I opened the folder. The top document was a charter for a nonprofit organization, the Laura Lane Scholarship Fund. "Your mother was a brilliant artist," Evelyn said, looking at the house. "She believed in beauty, and she believed in freedom. I am endowing this fund with $5 million. It will provide housing, legal aid, and tuition for young women trying to escape abusive households and gain financial independence." She looked at me. "I don't want to run it," she said. "I am too old, and I am too mean. It needs someone who understands the data. It needs someone who knows how to spot the patterns of control and break them. It needs a director." I looked at the paper. I looked at my mother's name. "You want me to run it?" I asked. "I want you to invest in it," Evelyn corrected. "Not just money, your anger, your experience. Take what they did to you and turn it into a weapon for others. Help them find the door before they get trapped for 10 years. I ran my thumb over the name Laura Lane. "Yes," I said. "I'll do it." "Good," Evelyn said. She opened the car door. "Now, let's go get lunch. I know a place that serves a martini cold enough to freeze a subpoena." I laughed. It was a real laugh, light and unburdened. I looked back at the house one last time. The for sale sign was already being hammered into the lawn by a realtor. The fake camera in the hallway was gone. The secrets were out. I got into the car. The door closed with a solid, expensive thud. As we pulled away, watching the house shrink in the rearview mirror until it disappeared around the corner, I realized I wasn't leaving home. I was going home. Only a bottle of conditioner had made them show their true faces, and one doorbell rang to return my entire life to me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please comment down below where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts on Harper's journey. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people.